All right, everyone. I'm super excited to have on the show someone who's been a huge inspiration to me and whose story demonstrates probably as well as anyone's, maybe better than anyone's, the fundamental corruption and problem with our entire food system, not just for non human animals, but for human beings too. So, Adam, maybe I'll just start by asking you tell us about the Wegmans cruelty investigation that sent your life down, hurtling down a very unexpected path.
Yeah, Wayne. So I went vegan back in about 2003, and I met a few activists in the area, and there wasn't really any major animal rights activity going on around us. So we kind of got together at a vegan restaurant, and we're just talking like, what's some cool stuff we can do? And then we realized that one of the largest factory farms in New York State was just like 45 minutes down the road. So we figured why not go check it out. And, there were a few steps along the way that kind of inspired us some more.
How did you know the factory farm was a few steps down the street?
Well, we
Did you
kind of
just see it?
started. No, not really. We hadn't. I guess maybe a couple of us had seen it in passing in the past, but I wasn't really familiar with the area. It's like rural New York, and where a lot of us were based out of Rochester and didn't go out into those parts very often. But we were looking at like what the major farms were, and we saw that this grocery store, Wegmans, kind of touted this farm as like part of their solution to problems with the food system, and they were really proud of the farm, and they called it "food you feel good about" on the package. And so we figured, well, this is a problem, and we already had seen all of the footage of factory farms and especially egg farms at the time. So I think that was like the biggest inspiration.
Yeah, and for those that don't know Wegmans is like this progressive sort of kind of Whole Foodsy, I think, grocery store. It's not as bad as Whole Foods. Whole Foods came later, but it was kind of Whole Foods before Whole Foods for upstate New York. But then it expanded into Pennsylvania and in the Northeast corridor. There's a ton of Wegmans everywhere. You see them like it seems like every 15, 20 minutes you'd pass another Wegmans when you're driving around in upstate New York, for example. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
They're very beloved. They're all over the place, especially in our area. This is around where they got started. And so they're generally a well-liked company. And so we thought that would be a good juxtaposition if we had footage from a terrible facility, which we just knew it would be. Just standing outside of it, it looked menacing, just shed after shed, and we knew that there wasn't good stuff going on in there. So
that is such a perfect word for factory farms, because and I think that's actually even more true today, because factory farms back then, at least I actually don't know what the barns at Wegmans look like, but I imagine they kind of look like barns. They might have had wooden frames and a roof that you might imagine being a barn roof. But a lot of the factory farms today, in some ways, they've sanitized the situation, and like the inside of a factory farm is cleaner than it was 20 years ago, for example. But some of these modern factory farms like Sunrise, I mean, these are like huge multi-level monstrosities. They don't even look like farm buildings anymore. They look like what they are, which is huge factories. Like Sunrise, I think the roof is like got to be 70 or 80 feet. It doesn't. And when you look the outside, you just think, oh, what's being manufactured here? You wouldn't even realize there's living beings inside. But I imagine Wegmans, because 20 years ago, there had been fewer of these massive facilities that, I mean, my guess is, do you know how many birds were in each of the buildings? Was it 30,000, 40,000?
it was around, let's see, there were about 12 to 14 metal sheds, and I think there were 750,000 hens there at the time. So
750,000. So that's
like 50, 60,000.
60,000 per shed. Yeah. So it's interesting. So two bizarre things to me about your story that I want to ask you about first. I laughed about this when I first heard this, but how in the heck did you decide to go visit a factory farm basically right after you went vegan? That's usually not the first step. So what is it that inspired you guys? And you specifically, because you led this project, but there were other fairly recent vegans who joined this project, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I guess in retrospect, I kind of led it, but we weren't really structured like that at the time. We were just a bunch of friends. And I think just because for some reason, Wegmans focused on me. So
Mhm.
at least as far as demanding that I do jail time and stuff like that. So, but yeah, so I think it was just there was an energy. There was
Mm.
something in our group where we were so inspired. There was a new vegan restaurant in town called the Atomic Eggplant. They
Hmm.
were almost vegan. They were maybe 95% vegan. And so there was just this cool energy in the group as we were sitting up there, having our dinner there and talking about what can we do. And we were so inspired. And then, so that winter of 2023, Milo Runkle came into town, and he was doing just a speaking tour of
2003, not
local.
2023. Just
Or sorry,
yeah, you said
2003.
2023. Yeah,
Yeah, a little.
2023 would be yeah.
That's not. It's not that recent. So yeah.
Uh-huh.
So 2003, Milo Runkle came to town and spoke at a local library, and it wasn't. There weren't a lot of people there, but I think most of our group were there, and he was doing open rescues at the time,
Yeah,
and it just all. He made us believe that we could do it. I
do it.
think,
Yeah,
and it didn't take a lot of us.
yeah,
And we just kind of. He had an open rescue manual for us, and
yeah.
that had all the info we needed, including biosecurity and how to film and just all these details. And we just
Yeah,
felt like we had what we needed.
I got that same open rescue manual from someone many years after you got it, and I actually don't even know who wrote it, but it's really good.
Yeah.
It was the basis for a lot of open rescue operations in the early 2010s. We made a new version of it, partly because just a lot of stuff that needed to be updated, especially legally. But yeah, it's kind of amazing how effective that manual was. Do you know who wrote that manual?
I have no idea. It didn't have. I
No.
think it was anonymous, but yeah. So
Yeah, I have some ideas about who it was. I think we could say now. I mean, it's so many years later. I think it was probably Freeman Wickland. Do you know Freeman?
yes, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So Freeman was an amazing activist, and he still is an amazing activist. And he's suffering from some health situations now, which is really sad because he's out of the movement. But he was the first person to do an open rescue in the United States after Patty Mark came to the U.S. and gave this talk at the UPC, the United Poultry Concerns conference that Karen Davis organized, that was just talking about this strange model of activism they started doing in Australia, where people would just walk into factory farms, document the conditions, and remove the animals, all completely openly. Not because up to that point, the animal rights movement, when it came to direct action, was so focused on underground action. Hiding your face, smashing and grabbing, running off, and not letting anyone know who you are, why you did what you did, and so on. And Patty, this nice woman in Australia who I don't think had much of a history of activism at that point, just decided, no, we should just be, if we think what we're doing is right, let's just be completely transparent about it and tell people exactly what we did. And she'd walk into factory farms and take hens out and then go to the police station and say, like, this is what I did. Can you go after the factory farm now and make sure none of these animals are being abused? And she came and gave a talk. I think it was like 1999, maybe it was 2000. And I think Freeman was in the audience and said, we should start doing this. And there was a group that I think still exists today called Compassionate Action for Animals. Do you remember this group?
I remember that group.
Yeah. So they did the first open rescue in Minnesota at an egg farm. And then shortly thereafter, a group led by Josh Balcom, Paul Shapiro, and Miyun Park did an open rescue and a number of open rescues in, I think it was like Maryland and Virginia.
I think maybe that was
killing.
Yeah, Silent Suffering, I think it was called, and that was a huge inspiration.
Yeah. I don't think I ever actually saw that. I just saw there was coverage in the Washington Post about the rescues, and that was really inspiring to me. But I don't think I ever actually saw the videos. Where did you see the videos? Was this, YouTube didn't even exist back then.
Yeah, there were DVDs being passed around. We went to an animal rights conference and got a bunch of DVDs, and we were even sharing some of our early footage there. And yeah, we couldn't just, we couldn't send stuff around on the internet. We were just kind of sharing tapes and DVDs.
Oh, that's crazy. I wish I'd been on the East Coast because so much of the great activism happening on the East Coast with COK. But yeah, so COK did those open rescues, and Nathan, who's now known as Milo, they changed their name, and I think Milo goes by they them. Is that correct?
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah,
I actually don't know. Maybe it's he him. I forget. But Milo started doing open rescues in Ohio too. For some reason, I didn't hear much about those until much later, but I knew about the COK open rescues. And then sometime, I think I learned about your open rescue after you were charged.
Yeah, and
I
we
think
were in the New
that's
York
the thing that
Times.
really blew it up. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty
Yeah, because
interesting. But before we talk about the case, sorry, you wanted to say something?
well, no, I mean, yeah, that's further along the case. So if you want to
Yeah.
rewind,
Well, I mean, one of the fascinating things to me about this vibe you were talking about is one, I felt it. There have been times in the movement where everyone just feels like we can accomplish anything. And those are the times when we actually accomplish things, when we just believe in ourselves. And everyone just says, yeah, why not? Let's just go walk into a factory farm. Because the other wild thing to me about that period of animal rights history is I think most of the animal rights movement history has been pretty defeatist. So, the animal rights movement has been around since 1975, but for the most part, we haven't had enormous political support. It's not like veganism has exploded in the last 50 years to the point that, a significant percentage of the population is vegan or even vegetarian. I think the Gallup polling agency did another poll a couple months ago showing that veganism was basically static at about 0.5 to 1% of the population. That's been true for decades. Hasn't seen much increase. If you look at the number of animals being killed, it's worse than it was in 1975. Not just on absolute basis, but even on a per capita basis. People are actually eating more meat than they ate in 1975, partly because Americans just gotten richer and meat has gotten cheaper. So, you have those two factors, Americans getting richer, meat getting cheaper, and more people are going to be eating more animals. So partly as a result of these macro level factors and partly because I think the movement just hasn't found the right strategy to really explode and create change. Through most of the movement's history, people have been pretty defeatist. But then there are these moments, and I think the early to mid 2000s was one of these moments, where just suddenly all these just ordinary people start feeling like, oh, we could accomplish something. And I experienced one of these moments myself. Not just, I experienced the moment you experienced just vicariously because I saw this stuff happen. I thought, wow, these guys are amazing. But I wasn't actually a part of that. I was just a cheerleader. But then I experienced one of these moments in the early 2010s where suddenly we did an open rescue in 2014 that was published in 2015. And suddenly everyone was doing it. And everyone just felt like, yeah, we can go out there and disrupt and protest and rescue animals and do sit-ins and lockdowns and you name it, we're going to do it. So kind of that was the first thing I wanted to say about that. Just there are these moments where there's a vibe, right? Where just suddenly everything shifts and everyone feels like we can accomplish things that we might have thought were impossible just, days or weeks beforehand. But the other thing is there's actually a phenomenon that's been identified more broadly in social movements. Have you heard of this concept, cognitive liberation?
no.
Yeah. So there's a sociologist who was himself an anti-war activist at Stanford, who's considered one of the fathers of social movement scholarship and theory, named Doug McAdam. And he coined this term to identify this stage in the civil rights movement in the early 1960s. And interestingly, it wasn't King and the Montgomery bus boycott. So most of us remember Rosa Parks and the bus boycott. That was in 1955. And that wasn't the moment that Doug McAdam writes about, where just suddenly, hundreds of thousands, millions of African Americans across the country just started both getting active and changing their views about what was possible in civil rights. Because there had been 100 years of segregation. There had been Supreme Court rulings like Plessy versus Ferguson that said, yeah, you guys are going to have terrible conditions in your schools and your buses, just in life, and you got to deal with it. That's just the way things are, because separate can be equal. So in theory, the law says equal protection of the laws, but in practice, we don't care. And they just sort of accepted this, the reality of their fate, for 100 years. And then suddenly around the year 1960, everything changed. And at the same time that you have activists getting bombed and murdered, like in the Freedom Summer. I think the Freedom Summer was in 1961. The first 3 people who come down to Mississippi to register people to vote are literally all firebombed with the support of the police. So you have these 3 activists. 2 of them are white people too. You got 2 white people in a block pursuit. They're 3 of the first people who are coming down to Mississippi just to register people to vote. They get arrested, and a mob sets their car on fire while the police watch as they burn alive, right? And you might think like, oh man, this is really scary. This does not seem like an optimistic scenario for civil rights. Like I would not be the sort of person who wants to go down to Mississippi. And yet somehow through this entire time period, when people are getting bombed and arrested and murdered and burned alive, African Americans are becoming more and more optimistic about the prospects for transformative civil rights legislation in America. And Doug McAdam pointed this out and said, yeah, there's something just weird about this. And he coined the term cognitive liberation. And the idea behind this was fundamentally, liberation isn't just about the material conditions of the world around us. It's about liberating our minds. That when we recognize that we have the power to change the world, we can, right? It's like liberating your cognition more than the material conditions. Because literally at the same time that people were sitting in jails across the country, because 1960 was also the year the sit-in campaign started, where people would just sit down and segregated lunch counters all over the country and get arrested and thrown in jail and beaten up. So the material conditions were more confined literally than they had ever been, where people are sitting in jail cells. Yet African Americans across the entire country were feeling free. And that was fundamentally one of the reasons why they won, because they kept coming out. And in fact, they got excited when they were going to get arrested. They said, yeah, let's go get arrested some more. And I think the early 2000s were one of these time frames where the grassroots movement felt very strong, that it felt like even I'm honestly, I don't even think I consider myself much of an activist in the early 2000s. I was just like a vegan cheerleader, but I could sense there was something different happening in the movement. I don't know. What do you think caused it? What do you think was like that vibe? Why were we all so excited and optimistic in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there was this idea that we're going to reach some sort of critical mass that basically,
Yeah.
if people just see what goes on in these factory farms, they're going to be convinced like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we could get like 10, 15% of people to decide to switch their diet over to veganism, it's just all going to click into place. And we were talking about making Rochester like a vegan paradise, and inspiring all these local people. And I mean, to some extent, we do have like 5 vegan restaurants in town now, so some things have shifted a little bit, but yeah, I think we had this hope, and I think I've got caught up a few times, like with leafleting in the late 2000s, and then the plant-based meat revolution is kind of this is all going to click, it's all going to fall into place finally, and I feel like we're not quite there yet, but who knows, maybe something will change.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about that, though, is, maybe the only thing that needed to change was more people needed to believe in it. And I don't even mean just more people in society at large. I just mean more people already support the cause. That if just more people who are vegan, and I've said this before, and we should get back to the Wegmans story, but if every single one of the vegans in this country just got active and really truly believed we will achieve animal liberation in one generation, it would have been achieved basically overnight. I'm 100% sure about that, based on every sociological study, political science research, and how social change happens. Partly because just the evidence on social change suggests you don't need a huge percentage of the population. I think peak mobilization for the civil rights movement, I believe, was 0.2% of the entire American population. Like the movement that did probably more to change the nation, the political currents, the culture. I mean, racism is now the cardinal sin in American life. That was not true in 1950, 1960, when a bunch of Ku Klux Klanners could literally firebomb a car and burn people alive just for standing up against racial segregation and asking for Black people to have the right to vote. Racism was not the cardinal sin of America in 1960. It is now. No one wants to be called a racist, and that was 100% because of the civil rights movement. And that was 0.2% of the population. At the peak mobilization stage in 1963, when people marched on Washington, there were about 200,000 people. There are 100 million people in this country, there were a lot of people who had never done any activism before in 1963. That was the first thing they ever did. They were inspired by King. They were inspired by Birmingham. They said, I want to march on Washington too. And that was just 0.2% of the population. So veganism is at a minimum 0.5, maybe up to 1% of the population. So if we got every vegan to get active, we would have 2.5 times as much power as the civil rights movement, the most powerful social movement in American history. And imagine how much change we could create. I mean, it would be instant. We just win.
Let's get to work then.
Let's get to work. How do we convince people that we could do this? We could do this. Let's go back to the Wegmans story. So you guys are super excited. You hear Milo speak. I mean, was it like instant? Did you just decide, oh yeah, let's just go do this? And was that the purpose of the talk? Was you just trying to get people to do open rescues?
Yeah, I mean, I think the talk was, yeah, just about the history of Mercy for Animals and their open rescue work. And yeah, the message was you can do this yourself. And we were already geared up to do it. I mean, we were already thinking about it,
Hmm.
getting ready, and then getting that open rescue manual was like what sold it to us. And we just, we got the equipment, the clothing. We learned about biosecurity, which I'd never heard of at the time. And
Hmm.
that ended up being like an issue that Wegmans came at us with, like, oh,
Yeah.
put our flock at risk, even though we did follow. I still have the galoshes I wore that night, and we followed all the procedures.
Really? That's
Hmm.
hilarious. So wait, how did you decide to do this even before Milo came out? Was it just because you heard about the COK stuff and you thought,
I think we just didn't. We were looking at just the biggest factory farm and how to make an impact. And I think we were thinking about protesting in front of the store,
mm,
and and asking them to go cage free, even though we didn't really believe in cage free at the time. Our heart
hmm,
wasn't in it, but that was our like going to be our ask of them to get us to stop to protesting.
hmm,
But then I think that the idea of open rescue from that talk is what kind of made that all click into place. And then we did get to meet other activists in the movement, and that kind of drove us in that direction.
yeah, yeah, that the interesting things about these moments where people experience cognitive liberation is suddenly people are willing to take huge risks too that they otherwise because and the reason is because you're willing to take huge risks when you think there are huge rewards. Fundamentally, the reason people are not doing activism today, and I don't mean just animal rights, I feel like so many movements are suffering right now. The climate movement is sort of falling apart. Black Lives Matter, it's barely even a thing. I just you never hear any media attention. It's barely on social media, and a lot of it just stems from this sense of self doubt that we're not achieving
Mm.
things. The world's screwed, and there's nothing to be done. Um, yeah, it's just so interesting how people are willing to take these huge risks when they feel like there's something they can achieve. How did you meet the people who ended up doing this open rescue? Was there, I mean, how did you even organize?
I think it was just word of mouth, friends meeting each other at a vegan restaurant. Just kind of, I think it all kind of, there was a
That's
local
hilarious. You
vegetarian.
just, I just think it's
Yeah,
so funny. It's like, hey, you're here. I'm here. Let's go rescue some animals from a factory farm. I just think, like, what
it
I'm
was great
imagining
though.
is just so hilarious, but also awesome.
Well, and it was like there was a vegetarian society, and they're now called the Rochester Area Vegan Society. But those
Huh.
meetings were kind of an organizing ground, and that's where we met. Like I met a local attorney who didn't wasn't involved in our case at all, but she had advised me that we weren't really in any legal risk because we were just
Mhm.
walking onto the facility. And
Yeah.
so it would just be a trespassing charge. And so we also had in our mind that it wasn't a huge risk. And we
Mhm.
even had, we had a bunch of people like who were lookouts and who were involved on the sidelines, not really going into
Mhm.
the facility. And it's just amazing how many people were willing to be involved with that. And
Yeah.
then later on when we had protests, we were getting 60 to 90 people at the protests, which was a lot for our
Yeah. That's amazing.
tiny city.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the stories that we'll tell in this conversation, but the terrible legal advice that you're given throughout your journey, just being told, "Oh yeah, there's no way they're going to charge you," and then after they charge you, "Oh, there's no way they'll charge you with a felony," and they charge you with a felony, and there's like, "Oh, there's no way they're going to actually convict you," and they convict you, and then there's no way you're going to serve jail time, and you serve jail time. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I think one of the lessons from this story is that we need better legal advice and better legal support for
Mm.
activists. But before we get into all those details, so you and this group go to Nathan Runkle, and I think you told me it was just like 9 people, right? It wasn't a lot of people at this talk.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
there were like somewhere around 12 people at the talk,
12 people.
and half of us were actually considering open rescue. Yeah, so it was
Wow.
a
Okay.
not a big attendance, but
Yeah. So we're talking about how half the people at this one talk are already considering open rescue. And so just tell me what the next step is. Do you just all get together and say like, let's go do this? Do you call another meeting? What is the next step?
yeah, we had just very small meetings,
Hmm.
and we were just kind of discussing the best way to go in. I got a video camera. We got a still camera, which was film based, I think, at the time. We
You
were.
non-vegan scum.
I know, it was wild.
Because
Yeah,
film does use some animal products. It
a
has,
little bit of gelatin,
yeah,
right?
I know it has a little gelatin.
What did we do? I mean, we got shirts printed with our logos on it. And we ended up going in, and I think it was May 2004. So, just a few months later, we were going into the facility for the first time.
Wow. Did you do some surveillance of the facility beforehand? Or was it you just showed up one day and said like, oh, let's just go in?
We showed up. We figured we'd see if we could get in on that first evening. We weren't planning on like trying to unlock any doors. We were just going to see if the doors are open. And just by chance, that there was some sort of undercover, or like some sort of, I forget what you called it, but like a group with their faces covered who went in and they ended up they like kind of broke some wire on the side of one of the sheds.
That's right. Yeah.
It was the first corner we came to. It was all busted open. And we thought at the time that it was just like in disrepair. But then come to find out, like maybe a year later, we met some activist who was like, oh, yeah, I did that.
Yeah. So a couple things to note about this. I forgot to say that it is the case that in New York State, trespass is actually not a crime. It is an administrative issue unless you trespass and do something beyond just trespass. So, for example, I believe in New York, if you trespass and disregard a sign that says explicitly no entry in private property, that potentially can be a crime. It's a misdemeanor, so it's not a very serious crime. If you trespass and do some damage, that's definitely a crime. But if you just walk onto someone's property, it's not even a crime. It's just an administrative violation, similar to a traffic ticket. The other thing I'd say about that is, there's something about upstate New York that there are these places where there have been multiple open rescues and people just going in and out of specific facilities. The other place where this is true of is Hudson Valley Fort Gras. Hudson Valley Fort Gras has probably been hit with more investigations and open rescues than any facility in U.S. history. And this Wegmans farm, I know exactly who you're talking about. I don't think we should name the person, but it's someone who was in Chicago for a while and then moved back to, I think, New York City. And he told me, someone actually used to work at Farm Sanctuary. I think we're thinking about the same person. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So he told me that, I don't even remember why they started doing this, but they basically just started visiting this farm and they cut holes. They just took some little tin snips and cut some holes in the wire and crawled in and had just been using this little hole in the fence to rescue animals and bring them to farm sanctuaries repeatedly. But yeah, it was all underground. It wasn't above ground activism. And I just think it's hilarious that you happen to just come and see exactly the same hole that they got. It's one of the wild details of the story. How did you respond when you saw this? Were you just like, oh my God, this is a miracle? Can you just describe the layout? Were there barbed wire fences? Would it otherwise have been hard to get in? Or was this just kind of pretty easy to get in? This just happened to be a convenient little hole.
There weren't fences at the time. They put some fences in after we released the footage a year later.
Oh, wait, but then what are you talking about when you're saying that something was cut open to get in?
So the sheds were like these 2-story buildings, and the top floor was where they kept the birds in confinement, and then the bottom floor was manure pits, like a massive manure lagoon, and there were these wires to provide some sort of ventilation, I guess, across. Like there were windows, but there was no glass or screen. It was just some wires. So somebody had taken tin snips and cut up the wires. And I don't know if we would have even gone in if that hadn't happened. Like, because I don't know if there was any other way to get in. We didn't have any way to get past the lock. We weren't going to break anything.
That's right. Yeah, these are these old school barns where all the manure just falls in the bottom of the barn, and it's just like piling up. Sometimes for years, and it's just like disgusting. It's just raining feces everywhere. And a lot of times you'd see hens that had fallen down, right? Did you see any hens that had fallen through?
I think most of the hens we rescued were in the manure lagoons.
Jesus, yeah. So they're essentially garbage at the facility at this point.
Exactly.
So when you walk in, you walk into the first floor where the manure is everywhere, right? You're basically walking in manure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And how did you even see the location? Was it just pretty obvious, the location? And did you have to crawl up then? Was like a hole that you had to crawl up through?
There were ladders.
Okay.
So we got into the manure lagoons, and then we kind of made our way over to the ladders, kind of climbed up partially, took off our bio security stuff, like our outer layer, and then we were in the top floor in the shed.
Okay. Actually, let's just paint the scene. So you show up at the farm. There's no fencing around the farm. You walk in. Is it just you walk in through a door? And these are 2-story buildings. There's 12 of them, I think you said. So can you just paint the scene for people who are listening? What do you see when you first get there, and what do you see when you open up the doors?
Yeah, we our driver kind of pulled up, and I think so 3 of us got out to go in, and then a lookout also got out of the car. So the lookout stayed in like a cornfield that was right by the facility. And then the 3 of us ended up walking to that nearest shed, no fencing or anything like that. That's where we saw the cutout side of that shed. So I think I was first to climb in, and then I got like a bucket that was just down in the manure lagoons that I could pull up to that window to help the other 2 activists in. And then,
so it's basically you crawled in from the outside into the top floor. So you didn't even have to go into the manure lagoon.
No, we had to go into the manure because that was it was the bottom floor. Yeah.
Okay. And how big is this? Is it like as big as a football field? Is it as big as a stadium? I mean,
it felt like the size of a football field. It was a big shed.
Okay. And so you can probably see the birds from the bottom floor, right? You can see them up above in these cages.
Yeah, there's little holes up above like that you could see through, and they're all defecating onto each other and then down into the manure pit.
And then onto you basically as you're standing there walking around. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So and then what happens when you walk up? What do you see? What's there?
Well, I think when we first got in there, the lights were on. They were on some weird cycle. So sometimes they were on, sometimes they were off. And yeah, I mean, it was haunting in there. And the smell, I still remember the smell like it was yesterday. That's the main thing I remember. It was terrible. The farm had actually been sued by neighbors because of the terrible smell there. But when you're inside, it's even worse. It was just haunting. All these, just so many birds, and they're making just these cooing noises that just kind of travel like waves across the whole facility. And very, very eerie appearance. And it looked abandoned. It looked like nobody had been in there. And sometimes there were hens who had their head jammed into, below like the feeding auger or something. They were stuck, and eggs were just piling up against the hens' bodies or faces or whatever. And it was just like nobody had been there in months, it felt like.
So just explain that. So you have a hen whose head is jammed into some sort of conveyor belt system, basically. Yeah. So, I mean, typically what I've seen in egg farms is they basically have like a conveyor belt style system where the laying area is slanted. So the eggs roll down, and there's like a little hole in the cage that fits obviously the eggs, but not the hens, because you can't let the hens get out. And the eggs roll down, and there were hens basically whose heads were jammed underneath that little portion that's open for the eggs. And then the eggs were just like piling up against their head.
Yes.
Holy shit. I don't even remember seeing this. Is this in the video footage you shot?
We did have some video footage in Wegmans Cruelty of that happening. Okay. Yeah.
I just don't recall. And those that's crazy.
Those scenes, that was just so remarkable. And and there was a feeding auger above it that would kind of turn, and the grain would kind of be pulled in. But, we would see often hens kind of jammed in there. And sometimes we would free the hen and then just leave them there, which in retrospect, it just crushes me to see that footage. I just want to go back. I mean, it's too late now, but it was, it's especially the first, we went there on 3 nights total. The first 2 nights we rescued 2 hens each night. The hens who were the sickest, and we just kind of left anyone else behind. But that 3rd night, we had a feeling that was going to be our last night, and we left with 9 hens that night because any hen that we helped, we're like, we're not leaving this girl behind. So
yeah, I mean, when you're doing these sorts of investigations and rescues, there's so many dark choices. Just the number of times that. I remember Julianne, one time we found a piglet who was trapped in the machinery of a nursery pen. It was some sort of, I think it was like an automated gate mechanism. I don't even remember exactly how it worked, but it just, I think there was some electronic buzzer that would cause the gates to close or open. And for whatever reason, this little piglet got jammed in the gate. And she was starving to death. I mean, she was like 1/3 the size. Her hip was like broken. She could barely walk, and she was emaciated. She was barely even awake. And it was one of the most awful scenes that we'd ever seen. And she's jammed in this gate, and Julian says, "We need to help her." And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And it actually was hard. She had to pull really hard to get this piglet dislodged. And then we see this piglet like hobbling around, barely able to walk. And then we left her there because, we just didn't have anywhere to take her. We didn't have the resources available. We weren't prepared for a rescue. And also, I mean, just to be blunt, that piglet probably we're pretty sure she was going to die anyways. So it's just like alleviating her suffering by making sure she wasn't trapped in this gate mechanism. But she was so sick and so weak at that point. And yeah, these are really evil places. It's like, I mean, I've said this before, and I'm sure you're sympathetic to this characterization, but factory farms and slaughterhouses just remind me of horror movies, except it's in a lot of ways they're just worse than even a horror movie, because a horror movie, at least, I mean, it's usually like one or two individuals being tortured slowly and killed. But in a factory farm setting, I mean, you're just seeing so many examples of it. And in many ways that can actually deflate the emotional impact, because if you see too much of it, it's kind of like that old quote by, I think it's attributed to Joseph Stalin, that one life is a tragedy, but a million is just a statistic. But you see so much suffering, it's so overwhelming, you don't even know where to place your emotional empathy in the context of this huge environment filled with suffering.
I know.
They're evil.
Yeah, it's hard to grasp how many, it's been 20 years since we were in there, and the number of birds who have been through that hell since then, is in the millions and millions. And yeah, it's hard to grasp that. And I think you just try to take care of yourself as best you can. And yeah, I mean, I love meeting chickens now, and I really feel like I connect with them because of what we saw.
Yeah. How did your team members respond, and how were you responding when you saw this for the first time, when you just first crawled up into there? I mean, were you all talking to each other? I mean, how did people respond?
We were so angry that this was happening, and I mean, we just kind of focused on documenting it, getting the footage and getting out. We were thinking of, the lookout who was outside with a walkie-talkie, and, and then our driver, and, we just wanted to kind of, we did focus on getting to work and doing what we came there to do.
Mm-hmm. So you guys had walkie-talkies and everything, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. We were all suited up, and we had a GPS receiver back then. Wow. You had to buy a special receiver
back then.
Mm-hmm. So we had one that we could show on video because we knew Wegmans would deny it was their facility.
Yeah. Wow. This is really sophisticated for a first time doing this.
I think it was in the open rescue manual. So we just kind of followed
the manual. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. So tell me about, so you're in this facility, you're documenting. Tell me about kind of this first rescue. And was that the plan that first night? Did you think that there was a chance that you'd try and rescue somebody?
Yeah, we had already arranged a vet and a sanctuary to bring them to. So, and we were, I think, expecting to rescue 2 hens on the first evening.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was our plan.
Yeah, and I think we got permission just a couple of weeks ago from Gene to say where those hens ultimately went. They went to Farm Sanctuary, which is the first farm animal sanctuary in the nation. Yeah.
One of the hens, her name was Angie, and she actually, according to Farm Sanctuary, she lived for 12 years.
Wow.
And there was a barn named after her there, Angie's Barn.
That's amazing. So how did you arrange the placement? You just told the sanctuary, hey, we got some birds that we might be bringing to you. And they said, sure, by all means.
Yeah. We talked to, I mean, I guess I had met Gene by then. So yeah, we just talked to them, and they were cool. And they were pretty open about it. And so, yeah, they even after we went public, they put up a placard, like, or it was like a sign there, that a permanent sign that said, like, explain the situation at Wegmans Egg Farm. And so yeah, they're very open, and even calling out Wegmans by name.
Was Susie Costa working at Farm Sanctuary at that time?
Yeah, she was. Yeah.
Okay, was she the shelter
So
director already, or
I believe Susie was the shelter director, so she was the one who did the intake
take? Yeah,
for the 9 hens.
yeah. Susie's a fascinating person. She's kind of like out of the movement now, and I don't want to go into all the details as to why, because that's kind of her personal business, and she's not a part of Farm Sanctuary anymore. And I know a lot of people dislike her and are upset about some of the things that she, may or may not have done. But in my experience with her, she was just such a hero for the animals. She was always willing to do whatever it took. And I brought animals to Susie before as well. And she never asked any questions as to where they came from. She never asked for any financial support or really any support. She just wanted to help the animals. And yeah, it's sad to see people like that leave the movement, but she's gone now. And they say that with full understanding. She did do incredible work, and I wish there were ways. I wish there were ways for us to get folks who, even if they've made some mistakes back in the movement, who've done such incredible work. But so, Susie, if you're out there, much love to you. Thank you for the work you did for Adam, for me, and for the animals. And I hope we can get you back into animal rescue work, because you were a legend.
It was amazing. The hens who had been down in the manure lagoons for a long time had developed these massive hardened manure cakes around their feet. So they're walking around with like these big clubs, and just watching Susie carefully cut them off. They were so hard, and so she had to be so careful and so gentle, but also really firm. And it was amazing watching her work with these birds.
Yeah, so you're describing something that I've seen too, which is animals with just completely disturbingly distorted feet. In this case, because there's literally feces caked around their feet. But just what did you see in these 2 hens that led you to rescue them?
Well, that was the third night we were there. So we went at the end of the night. We went to the manure lagoons, and we said, anyone who's down here, you're coming with us.
Wow.
Yeah, and we brought out 9 hens that night, and one of them sadly passed away on the drive back to the apartment. But the other 8 went on to live happy lives at Farm Sanctuary.
So tell us about that first day then. I mean, because I think you said earlier you rescued all the hens from the manure lagoon, right? Was that true the first day too?
No, not the first day. The first night, first night we got 2. Second time we went, we got 2. That was like 2 weeks later. And then a couple months later we went, and that's when we rescued 9 hens. And then that was when we tried to get as many as we could.
Okay. And that first night, it wasn't from the manure lagoon. It's just from one of the cages.
Yeah. I don't know if we spent a lot of time down in the manure lagoon the first night. So I don't know even how much we noticed down there, because we were just documenting the egg production part of it. And that was, we rescued 2 hens that night, and one of them passed away, I think, on that first night. Because she was really, I even forget the condition, but she was really swollen and very, very sick. So she didn't really have a chance. But
so it was probably egg yolk peritonitis. Does that sound familiar?
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
So it's the abdomen is the peritoneal cavity. And what happens is, these hens, these are leghorn hens, if I recall correctly. I'm almost 100% sure they're leghorns, which are the white hens that are typically used in egg farms. Leghorns typically will lay over 300 eggs a year, which is extremely unnatural. So in the wild, African jungle fowl may lay 20 eggs a year. And so they're laying more than 10 times the number of eggs that a normal chicken should lay. And this is all just due to selective breeding. It's essentially genetically engineering animals. Before we actually had more sophisticated genetic engineering technology, we used a process called selective breeding, which is just every generation, they only select the hens that lay the most eggs. And lo and behold, in a few generations, you can create this, in many ways, monstrosity. I mean, they're beautiful animals, and they're lovely and gentle and innocent. But in terms of egg creation, they're brutal machines that harm the hen's own life. Because what happens is they deplete their body of calcium. And a lot of the hens have leg fractures and wing fractures and brittle bones, because they literally, to produce so many shells for so many eggs, they're leaching calcium from their own bones. And eventually they just run out of calcium, and And so you get this problem that's called soft shell, or even kind of eggs that don't have shells at all. They just have the membrane around the egg. And obviously that's harder to push out of the abdomen because you have nothing to actually push. It's just this soft, mushy mess. And what happens, from what I understand, is that eventually a lot of this egg yolk actually just leaches into their peritoneal cavity and just stays there. They can't get it out. It starts to rot and inflame and become swollen. And it's one of the slowest and most awful ways for any living being to die. This group called Animal Welfare Footprint just did a very systematic analysis of welfare in egg farms specifically, and found that this egg yolk peritonitis, death through essentially your insides swelling inside out and your body basically exploding with compression of your internal organs, infection spreading through your entire body, causing this condition called sepsis, where your blood gets all infected with pathogens as well, is probably the greatest source of acute suffering in factory farms. It's extremely painful. And you see it in lots of birds, these swollen up abdomens. And yeah, they don't do very well. Interestingly, one of the birds we rescued from Sunrise Farms, the facility that I was just convicted for rescuing. I actually didn't even rescue these birds myself, but organized a demonstration. One of the birds we rescued, named Ching, who was collapsed on the floor of an egg farm and couldn't walk, and she was basically getting trampled. Later on, it turned out this is possibly partly maybe because her bones were leached of calcium. She wasn't walking properly. We're not entirely sure why. And she did have some foot issues beyond like the calcium. But she developed egg yolk peritonitis. And historically, this had always been considered just a death sentence, essentially. I mean, you could basically euthanize the animal otherwise, because once their abdomen is infected and filled with yolk, there's just nothing you can do. I mean, you can try and leach it out, but it's infected and it keeps growing and there's nothing you can do. And I think Ching was one of the first animals, if I recall correctly, where they actually performed a surgery on her, removed all the egg yolk peritonitis, all the infected and rotten egg matter from her abdomen, and she lived for like another year or two, which is amazing. But yeah, so one of the first two you had that swollen abdomen condition.
Yeah. Yep. And she passed. We were told that the Cornell veterinarians were monitoring the Wegmans chickens because they weren't used to seeing these egg-laying hens live longer than a year or two. So they were just curious about what their lives would be like later on. What kind of. So that was fascinating to hear that these birds were being observed just because they're usually killed so soon when their egg production declines.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you mean all the birds you rescued were being observed by Cornell?
As far as we know, yeah, that's what they told us at Farm Sanctuary.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, that might have been one of the early generations of genuine farm animal welfare studies, because Cornell was leading the entire nation on this. And a large part of it was Farm Sanctuary, and Farm Sanctuary was getting animals from people like you. So the only reason they were able actually to do these studies. And I think actually part of the reason the surgery was performed at UC Davis on Ching, they're willing to do the surgery at all, was because they were learning from people at Cornell about individualized farm animal care. Because typically through most of the history of the veterinary profession, when they thought about farm animal veterinary work, they didn't pay any attention to individual animals. It was all about the flock, the herd. And it was all about the economic productivity of the farm, not about the individual experience of the animals, which is super fucked up and also a complete contradiction of, from what I understand, the oath of the veterinary profession, because you're supposed to be caring for the animals. But yeah, so I mean, you might be one of the reasons why Ching was able to receive the surgery received and survive this horrible condition. So you said you rescued two. One had egg yolk peritonitis. What did the other have? And what did you observe in these hens that led you to pick these two for rescue?
Yeah, we were just looking for the sickest birds. We were finding so many birds with their heads trapped in the wire mesh. So if we were able to free them and then they kind of were responsive and moving around more, then we would leave them on those first two nights. But then if they were sluggish after, then we took them with us. Okay.
And so did you realize one immediately had this swollen abdomen, or was that something you observed after you rescued her? Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
What did the other one have? Was she just sluggish and weak?
I think her neck was really jammed in, and so she was
Mm,
missing a lot of feathers on her neck because she was stuck, and yeah, she was very sluggish, malnourished. So yeah, we wanted to get her, back and comfortable and well fed and in front of a vet.
yeah. Um, how did it feel to get her out? What was that
Incredible, yeah,
experience
it
like?
was so great. And then it was really sad when we lost a hen on the way
Hmm.
back, but yeah, that was some of the saddest moments. Was two of the hens we rescued when they passed. It was
Yeah.
hard on us, but seeing the hens able to walk for the first time
Hmm.
on solid ground, or you know, yeah, seeing them just I get them out into fresh air. I mean, we were kind of,
Hmm.
that was just incredible. Those moments
Yeah.
definitely stayed with me.
So tell the story of exactly how that happened. So you see this hen. Are you the person who retrieves her from the cage? And I assume you have to open up the cage door. You see this hen. You pull her
Yeah,
out, and then what
I was pretty
happens?
much, yeah, I was behind the camera
Okay,
most of
so you're
these
behind the
occasions.
camera.
So one of my co-defendants would be there, and so she would take these hens to, identify a hen who was sick, immobilized. I would film her. We documented this all and put it in the documentary.
Hmm.
And then yeah, so she would free the hen, and then we would make the call then whether or not to take her.
Hmm.
We brought a carrier, to put the hens in to take them out. So we kind of had that all planned ahead of time.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just a kind of a call that you make on the spot. And,
Hmm.
I don't know. The two hens who passed away, I guess I could have told you that was going to happen, but we still had hope.
Hmm.
Um, but we didn't want to leave them to just die alone. We wanted to give them a
Sure.
shot. So.
So the person who is being documented removing the hens. I mean, I don't. Is it okay to say who this was or no? Or
Yeah,
would
so
we?
the first night was Melanie. Yeah.
Melanie. Okay. In that the first night you're documenting her removing these hens, your lawyers had previously told you, or a lawyer, I shouldn't say your lawyers, because I think it was a lawyer who told you trespass wasn't an issue. Was there no concern about a burglary or theft charge? And was there discussion about this before you moved this little girl?
I mean, there was a discussion. They basically said if there was no value, if these hens
Mm-hmm.
had no value, then there was no criminal liability.
Really?
So as long as we were taking hens who were, very ill and were not producing for the company, then we wouldn't be in trouble.
Yeah.
And especially in the manure pits, we knew that they weren't going to take those hens and clean them off and put them back into production, that they were goners once they
Mm-hmm.
got down there. And that kind of came out at trial too.
Yeah.
So
And this is something the lawyer told you, the same lawyer, or was this something from the open rescue manual?
this was from an attorney, a local attorney I had spoken to. She didn't end up representing us at all. And
Yeah.
what she said was right. I mean, it ended up being right that I was acquitted of the
The
burglary
theft
charge, but I
charges because
still, I still had to face those charges at a 3-day
yep.
trial. But
Yep.
eventually I was vindicated by the court. And that's because the hens had no
Had
value.
ton of value. But the judge then went ahead and punished you for the burglary and theft anyways, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which
Hmm.
is a wild story that we'll talk about. Okay. So you get this legal advice saying the hens have no value. So did you think you weren't going to get charged at all? Was that the thinking, that you were going to release this and there's not going to be a legal consequence?
I I think we thought that Wegmans would realize that if they asked for us to be prosecuted, that it would become a major story.
Story.
And yeah, so we figured we could do this, we could release the footage, we could protest in front of their stores, and we can convince them to change their practices. We did not think that they were going to press charges.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the first night you see these two hens, you shoot the rescue, and you bring both of them. And did one of them die on the way to Farm Sanctuary then?
One of them passed away um on the way to the vet. So, and
On the
with
way to
this
that.
is
Okay.
so yeah, it was the third rescue that we just took them directly to Farm Sanctuary. I think we were
Mhm.
unhappy with the how
The vet.
responsive the vet was the first two occasions. So we figured we'll just take them right to Farm Sanctuary on that trip.
Yeah, this is another thing that's little known outside of the animal rescue community, that when it comes to farm animals, and really just anyone who's not a dog or cat, um, and sometimes even dogs and cats, the veterinary profession really just doesn't take the lives of animals very seriously. It really doesn't. I knew this even before I started doing farm animal rescue, because I used to bring pigeons to vets, and every single pigeon they just say like, "Oh, there's nothing that can be done. You just have to euthanize them." And I'd be like, "Wait, this pigeon just has like an injured foot. I mean, like, it's not a death sentence. I mean, she's just hobbling. Like, frankly, she was fine. I just grabbed her and I thought we could try and fix the foot. I'm not going to kill her. I mean, that's like murder. I just kidnapped this pigeon to kill her at a vet. You're supposed to be helping this animal." But the worst example of this was, this is such a weird story, but I was one time driving, I think I was driving on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, which is this huge highway, right? 6-lane highway. It's on Lake Michigan. There's cars driving both directions at just an astronomical speed. And I'm driving along this highway and I see this green thing moving around on the side, like on the shoulder of the highway. I'm like, what's that? And I get close and I realize it's a parrot, or she's a parrot, or he's a parrot. I never gendered this bird. And there's just this parrot. I don't know what happened to this parrot, but she's just sitting on the side of the road. And I run out there and grab her and pick her up. And she seems like alive and like reasonably alert, but she just can't fly and move that well for whatever reason. And I kid you not, I take her to 3 vets, and this is a parrot, not a farm animal. And I asked them, what can be done? And all 3 of them, without even inspecting her, they didn't even just examine her. They just said, "Oh yeah, there's nothing to be done. We'll have to euthanize." And I was like, "Wait, you didn't inspect her?" Is that the way? I mean, can you imagine a medical doctor, like someone, you bring your child and your child's just like lying there kind of tired, and your doctor just said, "Oh yeah, your child's going to have to be killed." It's like, it's preposterous.
Yeah.
And so I think it was the 4th vet I brought her to who finally said, "Oh yeah, I think she'll make it if you just hand feed her. You're just going to have to like tube feed her because she's obviously very weak and she seems hungry, but she'll be okay." And that turned out to be the case. And this parrot, I named her Tully, or him. I have no idea what gender. Apparently it's hard to sex parrots. Also hard to sex chickens, at least early in life. Later on, obviously, you can tell between roosters and hens.
Mm-hmm.
But this parrot was like the most delightful parrot. I mean, granted, also the only parrot I've ever had in my life. So I was going to say the most delightful parrot, but that's not a hard standard because she's the only parrot I've ever had. But she was hilarious and just so much fun and had so much personality. Like, she eventually became friends with my dog and would like scare my dog. I swear to God, this parrot would like play with my dog and scare my dog just to like screw with my dog a little. And my dog was like a big pit bull mix. And the parrot would be like, "Ah!" And my dog would run away. And the parrot was like very excited for herself. And she just needed someone to give her some food. Like, I tube fed her for a few weeks and then I released her back in the wild and hopefully she found her mate. But yeah, I'm sorry. I just went on a huge tangent. Why were you unhappy with your vets?
Well, it was just
similar?
disappointing to work with vets. And, I don't remember an incident with that particular vet. I know, like, working with the Humane Society, the local Humane Society, they have a farm animal rescue in our own, in the Rochester area.
Even back then they did.
Even back then they did. But
Wow.
they still have like steak and chicken dinners as fundraisers for the farm animal rescue.
That's wild.
A staffer made a joke. Well, if the chicken doesn't survive, you got free meat. Like, it was like really bizarre. And then we. But when you do meet the vet, like a vet, and I've heard nothing but great things about Cornell and the amount of respect that they have for the individuals. And that wasn't something that we thought would be a problem at the time. But yeah, it turned out that there is this bias against farm animals, even at the local Humane Society.
So is that where you bought the chickens, the first 2 chickens?
We, I forget exactly. I think we were working with a vet who was affiliated with the Humane Society, but we didn't bring them specifically to that place. They actually did file a complaint about the conditions at Wegmans Egg Farm when they saw the footage. But I don't think that went anywhere. I think I think they might have been taken on a tour there or something, and they decided not to press the charges.
By they, you mean the authorities were taken on a tour there?
I think the authorities were, and I think in New York State, humane societies have some sort of enforcement power.
That's true.
And so, yeah, I think that there was an animal welfare officer from
Hmm.
our local Humane Society who did visit Wegmans, but I don't think that went anywhere. And then Wegmans got out of the egg business and sold the farm off. Um, and I think that Wegmans might have pulled their funding of the local Humane Society, at least for at that
Wow.
time. I don't know if
After
they're
they
funding
filed a
them again.
complaint.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that Wegmans is funding them again. I don't know what the status is on that, but
Interesting.
that was
Yeah. So I
sad.
think New York is one of the states that does have this weird program where employees of a SPCA, a humane society, can become basically law enforcement deputies. They're actually deputized by the state with investigative and law enforcement powers. They carry guns. They can execute a search warrant. They can file an affidavit with a court for a search warrant. And these are nonprofits that are supporting
Mm-hmm.
animals, and their mission is to protect animals. And the reason this came about is in the mid to late 19th century, when the farm animal cruelty laws first came into existence, they were considered such a joke. Interestingly, so too were cruelty allegations about children and domestic violence. This has all kind of happened at the same time. And so traditional law enforcement, I think, just thought this is nonsense. Why would I spend any of my time protecting animals or children or women? Because children and women, like animals, just belong to some man. So if the man wants to beat their child, just let them beat their child. Who cares? It's the child's fault. But there was outcry about this because initially people were just upset about horses being beaten in the streets. And one of my former colleagues at Northwestern, Claire Priest, just wrote an article about this in some legal journal. I forget the name of the journal, but if anyone's interested, put a comment on the YouTube video and I'll send you a link to the article. Because people were just upset about these horses being beaten in the streets. And so these humane societies were given law enforcement power, I think in the late 19th century, to go and investigate these crimes that traditional law enforcement would not. And it's still a pathway through which I think greater animal protection could be achieved. But the problem is, even with these investigative powers being given to a humane society, ultimately, to actually shut down a farm or enforce the animal cruelty laws, you need other parties involved, specifically a district attorney, a prosecutor to actually pursue the case, and a judge that will rule in your favor. And that's been a huge hurdle, even when you have investigators who are willing to investigate animal cruelty. Yeah, but that's interesting that you guys were able to actually even get a visit, because that's very rare. Do you know if this is a voluntary thing, or did someone seek out a search warrant and get like some sort of legal process that permitted them to enter the facility without the consent of the farm?
I believe that Farm Sanctuary in part put pressure on the local Humane
In
Society.
society.
And I think that then the Humane Society reached out to Wegmans and it was a voluntary visit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they visited, but then ultimately, what happened? Just did
I
the
don't,
investigators say there's no problem? You just don't remember?
Yeah, I think the investigator said, well, these are common practices in the industry. They're doing the best. They follow the animal care certified program, and they kind of bought into all that stuff. They might have been given a tour of a newer shed. Maybe we were in an older shed, and maybe they had modernized in some way. I know that they were working on improving their manure processing at the time, in part because of a local lawsuit and a settlement. So, I think that they were modernizing their facility. But just to, same cages, same basic idea, just a way to dry the manure and have a cleaner environment.
Yeah. Was this inspection, did it occur before or after you all were charged?
It was before we were charged. So, yeah.
Okay, so you rescue these animals, and are there any other examples from those rescues that were particularly compelling for you? Like on the last day, was there anything?
Yeah, the last day, just all the manure pit birds was just, that was so amazing. But sadly, the bird who passed away, we had named her Phoenix. And we were hoping that she would rise from the ashes and inspire people. The footage of her is so haunting, where she was just fully submerged, just her head sticking out of the manure.
Yeah, I think I remember
and
this.
Just
yeah.
The what these chickens go through. And then at trial, it was basically they just get their necks wrung and killed when they get down there. They're not bathed and put back in the operation.
And that often is very kind of infrequent. It's just,
Hmm.
in theory, they're supposed to walk the barns, I think, twice a day, and by modern standards. And I've definitely seen hens that appear to have been trapped in some kind of machinery or caught in a manure pile, whatever it is, who've been emaciated. So, for example, the first hen that we openly rescued, May, the vet estimated that she had lost 80% of her body weight, which that doesn't happen overnight. I mean, she was skin and bones. She was so light. Um, yeah, I mean, it was interesting when I picked her up because her feathers made her look like a normal hen. Then I picked her up and I just felt like, oh my gosh, it's like she's a feather. It's just she barely even. And it turns out this is true of human beings too. If you have no flesh on your body, you're actually very light because our skeletons are very light. It's the flesh around the skeleton that's actually heavier. The water, the muscle, the fat tissue. Um, yeah, so it's very, very common for these animals to be languishing for days or even weeks. Um, but it's sad that the only mercy they might hope for is to have someone wring their neck.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, because I mean, a lot of the birds don't die instantly from having their net broke. So you'll see them flailing around, and this happened at sunrise. They didn't allow us to show us this footage at trial, but it's funny. The owner lied first of all and said, "Oh, we don't cervically dislocate animals. We put them to sleep in these CO2 boxes." And we had undercover footage of them breaking the animals' necks. But the other thing is they just break the animal's neck and just throw them on the ground for someone to pick up later. And you saw on so many occasions the neck dislocation had not actually killed or even paralyzed the animal. The animal was just seriously injured. And so you see them like flailing around and trying to stand up and their neck's broken. It's just extraordinarily painful experience. And that's the way the mortality rates of these egg farms sometimes approach, in some cases, 20%. So you're talking about the facility of 750,000 animals. You're talking about like 15,000 animals, or 150,000 animals, I should say. 15,000 would be mercy, but 150,000 animals potentially just slowly suffering to death in these awful, unbelievable ways. And it's all being described by the industry as humane and acceptable and part of industry practices. It's wild.
I'm haunted to think of how they clear the shed out when they want to put new layers in there. What do they do? How do they dispatch? I know they used to send them to slaughter, but they don't anymore. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's not worth it because the chickens are all skin and bones. No one wants to buy such low quality chicken. They used to use them occasionally for rendering, but that no longer happens. They're so emaciated and weak by the end of their egg laying period that it's not even worth sending them for pet food. So what I've seen is there are these like mobile devices that are gas chambers where they just grab all the hens, and this only happens during mass depopulation. If it's just a few hens here and there, then they just break their necks and throw them on the ground. But there are these gas chambers where they just throw all the birds in the gas chamber and they asphyxiate. And they
Yeah.
almost always use CO2 gas, which actually forms carbonic acid in the animal's lungs. And CO2 is actually what causes suffocation reflux. So
But it's
typically when
cheap.
people gag and suffocate, it's super cheap because it's everywhere. We're producing a lot of it, and it's destroying the entire planet. But see, it's interesting. From what I understand, that the suffocation response that people feel when they can't breathe, like if you choke someone out, it's actually not due to lack of oxygen. It's because of the profusion of CO2 in your lungs. So when you asphyxiate an animal using CO2, you cause that suffocation response, and it's as if someone's just choking someone out. Like imagine what it feels like when you feel that pressure, like I need to breathe, I need to breathe. It's actually not because you lack oxygen, it's because the CO2 concentration in your lungs and your bloodstream gets so high that you feel this gagging response, like I desperately need to breathe out. It's not just I need to breathe
Yeah.
in, I need to breathe out, I need to get this air out. And they induce this in every one of the, and I don't remember how many hens it is that are killed every year. Let's look it up. I know it's over 100 million. How many?
Why
egg-laying
even
hens
look
are
at
there?
it? Why even?
I don't know.
And I mean, I'm sure that it's safer than using like argon or some sort of like.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like you could easily accidentally poison yourself with argon.
You want to guess how many it is now in the year 2022?
I don't. Yeah. What is it, Wayne?
It's 308 million. It's like basically the entire population of the United States is wiped out in egg farms using these incredibly brutal methods of slaughter. Yeah, it's a pretty
Yeah.
vile system.
They,
Okay, so you
yeah.
save these hens. There's what else happens after you you produced this documentary, Wegmans Cruelty, which is still available on YouTube for the record. Everyone should go check it out.
Yeah, we should.
Wegmans Cruelty.
I need to like remaster it or something because it's
Yeah.
we shared it 20 years ago, so it's
Yeah.
like 240p or something. But
Yeah. You and
it's,
Star Wars, George Lucas.
yeah, that's right. I got to get with George.
Although I guess a lot of people didn't like what George Lucas did. So hopefully your revamp is a little better than his.
Put a lot more CG into it, but but yeah, I mean, it took like a year to edit that video,
Wow.
and there was a lot of there was just a lot of debate over what to include, what to take out, and we gathered up all of our materials, and we gave the exclusive to a local reporter at the Democrat and Chronicle. He was an environmental reporter, and we thought, wow, this is going to be a big story. It's going to be like the front page news, and it was buried in the back of the A section when it came out.
That sucks. So why did he promise front page, or what happened with the negotiations of the journalists?
He was just we just really liked his work. He did some really great stuff on the local Humane Society and some great stuff on the environment. I think he might have done a piece on the environmental impact of the egg farm or something like that. So he was covering like rural kind of stuff, and we loved his work. So we went to him and we met him at a local mall that has since been bulldozed, and we handed over all the materials, including GPS. Footage. We kind of prepared a separate DVD because we knew that Wegmans would deny it all. Sure. So we needed to put like everything we could in front of them.
So, and why did it end up getting buried? Did the journalist explain it? Did he make any promises to you beforehand?
No, he didn't make any promises, and I think he was upset about it. And I think I forget exactly what. Like Wegmans made him change something in the story. And he didn't agree with it. I think there was like, they made them issue a correction that Wegmans denies. Basically, we had convinced him and his editor that we were at the facility, like including like filming the GPS receiver, walking into the facility, showing the cages. But Wegmans made them like say that they deny it, that we weren't at the facility.
Yeah. Until they criminally charge you. Then they said you were at the facility and they're going to charge you for it.
That's funny.
So did the journalist apologize? Did he explain? Or I guess maybe he didn't even need to because there was no promise made. But I don't think, for you to rest your entire freedom on this story and for it to get buried, that's terrible. I mean, that must have been really upsetting.
It turns out that wasn't the story as much as the arrest and prosecution was the story. So, and that, but yeah, it was kind of disappointing, but there was even a follow-up story about one of our the members in our group. She was fired from her job at it was a local accounting firm. So they had handled Wegmans' accounts, so they just fired her. So that kind of became a bigger story. That was on like page. It was further. I don't remember what page it was. Maybe page 1 of the B section or something. But that got more prominent placement.
That's crazy. Was this was this because of Wegmans' pressure, or was it just the company just deciding they were going to fire her?
I think it was. It did involve Wegmans' pressure. Yeah,
that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things, I think this happened recently with the RSPCA investigation in the UK, where I think the journalists actually wanted the story to get more coverage and be on the front page, and I think there had been. Maybe I shouldn't share too many of these details because I don't know how much of these are confidential, but I think there had been kind of an informal promise that this is going to get basically the front page of the Times, which is one of the most important publications in the United Kingdom. And then it ended up getting buried in like page 14 too. And it's like the back corner of some stupid, A14 page. But a lot of times the journalists themselves would like to cover the story. And, every time a journalist writes something, they want a cover story. They want it to get more attention. But it's the senior editors at these newspapers that swoop in at the last minute. So I'll give you an example. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. So one of the most famous journalists and editors in American history, this guy by the name of Marty Barron, he ran the Boston Globe and then he ran the Washington Post. He was hired by Jeff Bezos. When Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, the richest man in America, who has more resources than anyone, he specifically hired Marty Barron to run the Washington Post. And this is a publication that, broke the Watergate story. They've broken some of the
Mhm.
most important stories in American history. You think the editor-in-chief would be concerned about things like national security and protecting Americans, presidential politics. And I kid you not, in this story involving two piglets, um, Marty Barron, and I know this because they accidentally sent me the email correspondence. It was very weird. But the editor-in-chief of the entire Washington Post intervenes to complain about the credibility of our evidence in a case involving two piglets rescued from a factory farm in Utah. And it's because of the influence of money in journalism. Like, you've got these big advertisers. And like, when I looked at the Marty Barron story, I think I don't remember the exact details as to why Marty was so upset. I do remember it was an accident that they sent me the correspondence. But I think it had something to do with, like, oh, these are bad people, something like that. He just forwarded along something. And I remember asking the journalist at the time, and what's driving this? What's causing this? Is it just straight up corruption? And I think he was kind of embarrassed to admit that he had accidentally shared this correspondence. Although maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe he did it intentionally because he wanted me to know what was going on. But what he told me was, I don't think it's actually the money. I think it's like a weird, it's like this weird cultural corruption. I still remember what he told me. He said, you got to understand, the editors of the Washington Post are a bunch of old white guys who smoke cigarettes and love eating bacon. And everything you're doing is challenging their fundamental identity, what they do every day in their lives. And so even if there isn't someone who's just outright bribing them and telling them to suppress this story, they don't want to hear it. Like, they don't want to see it. They don't want to find out that something they're doing is causing cruelty to animals. And so they were going to kill the story anyways. And we were lucky they posted anything at all, frankly, in that particular Washington Post, because the Washington Post is a huge newspaper. It's a national paper. But I wonder if something like that was going on with the editors. So did he ever explain to you, like, what the process was that led to the story being suppressed, or at least, placed on A14? You didn't?
Yeah, not really. We didn't talk too much about that because we were suddenly busy by, the state police, like, parking in front of our driveways and,
Really?
like, trying to get us to talk to them. We're like, we don't want to talk.
Wow.
Sorry.
So that happened right after the investigation broke.
Yeah, it was like a couple of weeks after that they started to really, put the pressure on us. We had somebody come to a meeting and record the meeting, or somehow take notes during the meeting, because that ended up in front of the grand jury. So yeah, they started to, well, now that we were open about it, we went public. I think they had some idea it was us going in, but but now that they had that hard evidence, they were starting to build a case against us.
What do you mean they had some idea? Even before you broke it to the public, they had some idea that people had gone in?
Yes, because of the complaint to the local Humane Society.
Wow.
And I think at that time they had discovered that busted wire in the corner of the shed. So they started kind of putting it all together. And then we had been calling Wegmans, trying to get statements from them, and letting them know we were concerned about the conditions inside the facility before we even went in.
Okay.
So,
and by we, you mean Compassionate Consumers, the organization?
Yeah, our little group.
Okay. So I see. So they get this complaint from the Humane Society, and they find out, based on this complaint, someone's going in, and then they see the place that you actually didn't even cut open, but is cut open, that gives someone access to the farm. And then they also know there's this group that keeps complaining about Wegmans, and they kind of put two and two together and say, oh, these are probably the people who got the evidence to form the basis of the complaint. But instead of investigating the animal cruelty, they start investigating you. But that didn't start until you went public. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did not hear from the police until we went public.
Okay. So tell us what happened then. So you published the story. How does the story do? Are you happy with the results from the story?
We were getting a lot of attention, but yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't. I mean, and we were having protests, and so the local activist community was definitely very involved and aware of what was going on, and so we were starting to have protests either in front of the Wegmans flagship store or Wegmans headquarters in the area, and
and that's in Rochester, their headquarters.
Yep.
Okay. Wow.
So then from there, I mean, then it was, they issued the arrest warrant. I remember hearing about that at work. And basically they were asking us to turn ourselves in. So yeah, we had retained a local attorney, and he told us, just to go show up, don't answer any questions except for like your name and address, and you'll be in front of a judge, just plead not guilty. And he was busy that day, so we went out, and I remember how tight the handcuffs were that they put on me to bring me
Yeah,
in
they're
front
really
of the
painful.
judge. It's insane.
No, it's insane how painful they are. Yeah.
And then the judge, it was a town court judge, and he was like, they came here willingly, right? And the police were like, yeah. And I guess we were the county sheriff. So yeah, the sheriff was like, yeah. And then so the judge was like, take those handcuffs off. So
wow. That sounds like a nice judge. Was that your trial judge?
No, that was just the town court judge.
Town court judge who just happened to be there that day. Yeah. Because the trial had to be in Superior Court because it was a felony trial.
Because the felony,
so it got bumped up. Yeah. Well, that's disappointing. It's kind of, do you wish? Oh, I wish we had that judge for the actual trial. I've never heard of a judge saying that sort of thing. I mean, because compassion in judges is very rare. It's like the nicest judge I've ever heard of. So wait, how did you even get to the point where there's an arrest warrant? So the state police start following you around? Was this like within the first week?
I would say it was within the first week. Yeah, we started, getting followed, and I remember one of the activists. She was blocked into her driveway by the police. So,
and what were they doing? They're just asking you questions.
Yeah, they were trying to get us to answer questions, but we wouldn't talk to them. So, and then I guess our attorney had called them and said like that he was representing us. So they faxed the arrest warrants to him. So he notified us, his secretary notified us and told us to report when we had a chance to turn ourselves in.
Was the infiltrator who was taking notes at one of your meetings, was that before or after you were arrested? Do you know?
That was before we were arrested, I believe. Okay. Yeah.
And did you identify the person before you were arrested? Did you know that person? It was just some random member of the public and you don't know who it was.
Yeah, some random member came to like open meetings. And yeah, I think I can remember what he looks like, but I think he was like a state police undercover officer.
Well, at least it was a cop and not an infiltrator. Because that's the most disturbing thing is when there's like actual informants from the movement, and they're often paid. I mean, this is one of the little known facts about American law enforcement is when I was looking at the statistics, I remember the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, I think it was just the amount of money they were spending on paying people to do cigarette investigations. So there are these people, actually New York is one of the states, most famously Eric Garner was accused of this. Eric Garner, the black man who was killed by the Staten Island police, I think. Yeah. So there are these people who sell these cigarettes without the normal taxes. They just get them in bulk somewhere and they sell them, and they're not going through the normal regulatory system, so they can sell them more cheaply, and just they sell them on the streets. And I mean, probably shouldn't do it. I wish people didn't do that. I wish no one smoked, because smoking is terrible. It kills so many people. But not the crime of the century. Like someone selling loosies on the street, you wouldn't think the government would be investing huge amounts of money. And if I remember correctly, the DA was investing like hundreds of millions of dollars. It was at least millions, but I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars just to pay people off as informants in these cigarette investigations. And like, I remember looking at the numbers, and I think like the total amount of value of the cigarettes that they were investigating was like a few $1 million, and they spent like $100 million just paying off these informants. There's a very famous episode of This American Life. Have you heard the Turncoat episode?
No.
Okay, so it's a great episode. You should go listen to it. You'll have your mind blown. This guy named Brandon Darby, I think his name was, and he started this group called Common Cause in New Orleans to help people after Hurricane Katrina. But then he got disenchanted. It's funny because there are so many Brandon Darbys today. Because back then, wokeness was not nearly as big of a deal as it is today. But nowadays, like there's so many people getting called out, and he got called out and got disgruntled. I think actually part of the reason was because the people at Common Cause, I think it was called Common Cause or maybe Common Ground. I forget the name of the organization. But part of the reason he got called out was because he didn't want to serve vegan food in the kitchen when they were providing support for the local community members. So, but long story short, he got all these fights at the local activist scene and decided, I'm done with leftists. And he starts taking money from the feds. And then he infiltrates an organization that's protesting the RNC. And I think it was in Minneapolis or Milwaukee or somewhere around there, somewhere in the Midwest. And basically encouraged and supported these activists in making Molotov cocktails that they never even used. They just made them. And it was like Brandon was like basically telling them, come on, if you're a real man, you'd make a Molotov cocktail. Aren't you doing direct action? I thought you were serious about confronting injustice. And so he encourages them while being paid by the FBI and by federal government to encourage these young people, like an 18-year-old kid. I think one of them was like David McKay, I think his name was, to basically make Molotov cocktails. And lo and behold, a couple of days before the RNC, I think it was maybe the day after, all these agents raid the place where the kid's living. They take the Molotov cocktails and he goes to prison for like 10 years, or I don't know how long it was. But just the amount of money that is wasted on these undercover investigations of activists is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's like an actual agent, but a lot of times it's not. It's just people being paid by the government. And the Turncoat episode of This American Life it's just one of the most gripping episodes of This American Life I've ever heard. You're going to love it. I guarantee you, you should listen to this and you're going to love it. Because it's such a fascinating psychological portrayal too about why someone turns against a movement. And I just think in the story of animal rights, we're going to hear a lot more stories like this of people have turned against a movement, partly because I don't think for Brandon, it was principally money. It was just this loss of identity he felt like when he was no longer accepted and beloved by the movement, because he was this hero in the movement. And then because of various political disputes, people thought he was a loser or just didn't like him. He wasn't as welcome. And he decided, well, I need to reassert my heroism in some way. And so he just flipped his identity and said, well, now I'm going to be the hero for the U.S. government and going after these activists. And we definitely had situations in our history where I don't know if we'll actually ever prove an activist 100% turn, but where stuff like this has very clearly almost happened.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Over the years, I mean, especially at that time, I would have people call me and say the weirdest stuff. And and I would immediately be suspicious and would not want to affiliate myself with them. But yeah, people saying, I'm really fired up. Let's really get these guys.
Let's go burn something down or something. Yeah.
And I'd be like, no, that's not what we're about. Sorry, you can't be part of our group.
Yeah. Do you think you became paranoid after finding out there was this government agent who was in your meetings?
That helped. I mean, the thing that really shook me was, having like my words that I said at a meeting that I didn't think was being recorded, being used at my grand jury hearing, that definitely kind of shook me in a way. And then I don't know when Eric McDavid's story came out, but feels like it was around that time, maybe a few years later. And that was the thing that made me so angry.
Yeah. So say more about Eric McDavid's story. He's the one featured in If a Tree Falls, right?
I don't know.
Oh no,
he was
Dan
in that
Allen is If a Tree Falls.
He was in like that magazine. There was a magazine article about the infiltrator who convinced him.
That's right, Anne.
Anna, is that it?
Yeah.
His story was so horrifying, and.
Yeah, I'm just reading from his Wikipedia page. Zoe Elizabeth Voss, a paid FBI informant who is known by Anna, had been working with the FBI to infiltrate this environmental group since 2004. She encouraged their activities, provided them with bomb-making instructions, money to buy the raw materials, transportation, and a cabin to work in. Anna made use of McDavid's attraction to her. He described her as his soul twin and said he had changed his behavior in order to please her. And Anna was the reason Eric McDavid went to prison for 20 years.
But Anna's love letters were being written by, as far as I remember, FBI psychologists who were specifically doing their best to change his mindset and to convince him into doing these things. And this happened around the time that we were doing the Wegmans investigation.
Wow.
And I just remember how awful that was. And that stuff still happens here. I mean, not, I haven't seen it in the animal rights movement, but I've seen that those kind of infiltrators, in various settings. There was just a couple years ago, there's a bar, just like a block that way, and I guess someone was convinced to go buy a machete to go attack the bar a few years ago, a member of the Muslim community, and he was just convinced to buy it at Walmart and was given like federal prison sentence for it. And there was I think they even might have shut down the New Year's Eve celebrations that year or something in the city because of that scare tactic. I don't know. It's just, you hear about these things and it's really bizarre. I think that there are people within the government who are looking for something to do, and they I think that if your job's an infiltrator, well, who are you going to infiltrate? Like, you got to find a group, or, if you're getting paid for it. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's worse than just finding something to do. I mean, I think that's part of motivation sometimes, but what I've seen, not just in the animal rights movement, but in other contexts, and the civil rights movement is probably the most famous example of this, is that when you're part of this power structure and it's become so normalized that everything about this power structure is good and legitimate and just, that anyone who threatens that power structure is considered an enemy, immoral. And you start believing the ends justify the means, right? That if I'm trying to rid society of this cancer, like Martin Luther King Jr. was described by the FBI as the most dangerous man in America. And they did everything they could to rid America of the cancer of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King Jr., including surveilling him while he was having affairs with people, and then sending him a letter to try and convince him to kill himself, saying they were going to release audio tapes of him having affairs to the public, including to his wife, and they sent the letter with the audio tapes to him and his wife. And it's just, it's wild to me that you have stories like this that are not disputed. Everyone agrees this happened. And yet people still trust our government. I mean, to me, you have one instance like this, there should be some sort of complete revamp of everything. Like, if you and I were part of an organization where someone had done this, we'd probably just say, like, honestly, let's just dissolve this organization. Like, this is not, something has gone fundamentally wrong with our organization. When someone is writing fake love letters to try and convince someone to plant a bomb, or, surveilling someone's sex life in order to try and convince them to commit suicide, like, you've lost all moral credibility, if anyone, and the organization just gets to be dissolved. But the U.S. government, if anything, has more power than it did in the 1960s when they did this to the king. And it's just a story that most Americans don't know about it. Like, I didn't read about this until probably the mid to late 2000s. He has a very well-educated person who learned the history of social justice, because when you're in junior high school history class, the story of King is totally whitewashed. I mean, there's a little discussion of the arrest and the letter from a Birmingham jail and all those things, but they just leave out the parts where the entire federal government is trying to destroy him and assassinate his character and killed people, like literally killed people. Because you look at like Huey Newton and the Black Panthers. I mean, the feds are like involved in assassination attempts against our own people merely for asserting their rights. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's honestly, if there's one thing that doesn't just make you paranoid, but pessimistic about the future of America, it's reading about the history of the American government. It's really scary.
Yeah. Well, I just saw part of that, and it was just, it was really weird reading the grand jury testimony that was then used at trial. I think they did. It was strange reading what somebody who came to a meeting observed. Yeah. And
so tell us about that grand jury. You turn yourself in, and then in New York, there's a proceeding called a grand jury proceeding where a jury is actually called to assess whether there's probable cause for felony indictment, correct? Or felony arraignment. And tell us about that. How did that happen? And how did you come to have these words that you said in a meeting that you thought was a private meeting suddenly read back to you?
Yeah. So I basically, we retained a different attorney at that time. Somebody we had met at the Farm Sanctuary Hoedown, actually. And he was also representing the Shack 7 in federal court. So he had advised me. We got a letter saying we could be present as a witness at the grand jury. And when I read the letter, I thought it meant I could sit there on the sidelines and watch the grand jury happen. But it meant no, you would be sitting there and being asked questions by the jurers. So they have a pool of jurors there, and I've come to find out you probably shouldn't testify against yourself at a grand jury hearing. But at the time. I know, but at the time, our new attorney was like, "This is great. You're going to get there, explain why you went in there.
Yeah.
The prosecutor is I see him as a friendly prosecutor because
Wow.
the DA was known to go after animal cruelty offenders. He had prosecuted somebody for beating a goose at a golf course with a club. So he had made the news as tough on animal crime.
Abusers.
So I decided, okay, I'll go in.
This is all terrible advice.
I know. So I remember signing the document.
Was there any reason to think the DA was concerned about farm animal cruelty? Because he had presumably turned down an effort to prosecute Wegmans based on the investigation itself.
Presumably. So I think that our new attorney thought that he was like just friendly. Like I think that he maybe got along with him well. But it turns out, that was a really bad idea.
Was this attorney experienced in this county? Did he have a relationship with the DA? No? Okay.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So he was practicing outside of the county normally.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, he was out of New York City. So I remember signing away my Fifth Amendment rights and going in front of that jury, and the jury was so mad at me. What?
Were you prepped for this? Did your attorney prep you for it?
Just a little bit, just like, stick to the details, don't, tell them why you went in and just be honest. And so there wasn't much prep. And that jury, by the time I got in there, they had already
heard all this evidence.
Heard all this evidence against me. They were mad. They were like, you are coming into our town, our county, and you're telling us what to do, how to treat farm animals. You think you know more, you city boy? Like, then they had this idea of me in their heads that was already like they were ready to convict me right then and there. And all they could do was indict me at that time.
Indict me, but they were very happy to do so.
Yeah, they were very happy. And does
New York require unanimous grand jury for them to indict?
I'm not sure. I don't know. And I didn't know that they could ask questions until I was sitting there being grilled by a bunch of jurors.
Yeah, that varies quite a bit. 16 out of 23. Okay, so typically it's not unanimous for grand juries to indict. And it varies quite a bit based on the judge who's overseeing the proceeding, whether juries are going to ask questions. But my guess is this judge, and usually it's considered defendant friendly for the jurors to ask some questions because they can have like some sort of personal connection to the witnesses and the defendant. But this judge probably saw, this jury is, chomping at the bit to go after this guy. Let's let him take a bite. But the old line about grand juries is that
ham sandwich.
A prosecutor convince a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. I mean, it's a completely unfair proceeding because there's no cross-examination. The defense isn't entitled to present any defense. It's entirely controlled from the moment the jurors walk into the door by the prosecution. And so there's not a lot of benefit. I mean, I think your lawyer is right that there are cases, very, very rare cases, where a prosecutor actually doesn't want to bring an indictment and will basically color the evidence in a way that will allow you to prevail, and then use the excuse and say like, oh, I would have loved to pursue this case, but the jury spoke. Like every time I hear this, I just think you're clearly a liar. Prosecutors always say this. They always say, oh, I would have loved it. And it's always in these cop cases where a cop shoots someone. Like a cop shoots someone and they bring them to a grand jury for like a manslaughter or even a murder indictment. And the prosecutor always says, I would have loved to prosecute this case, but the grand jury spoke. It's like, that's because you presented the evidence in a way that convinced them there's no probable cause. Because probable cause is such a limited threshold. It's like the lowest threshold in the legal system. It just has to be enough evidence that a reasonable person could conclude the crime was committed, right? It's not much. It's like very minimal evidence. And you're controlling all the evidence the jury sees, right? So you can decide. I mean, like, you could get probable cause from, one statement by one person, even just the cop coming in and saying, yeah, I think you probably did it. Yeah. And grand jury indictment probably happens because the judge will instruct the jury, well, you're not supposed to use burden of proof, like beyond a reasonable doubt or even preponderance of the evidence. It's not even like more likely than not. It's a very low standard. So it's always dangerous for a defendant to go in front of a proceeding like that because everything you say can be used against you at trial. And that sounds like it's exactly what happened to you.
Yeah, that's what happened. I basically said what nights we had been in there, and
Yeah.
admitted to taking hens out, and which was already in the documentary, but still, it didn't help my case. So now all of a sudden we knew we were getting indicted, but at least on that day, the DA told me that he didn't see it as a jailable case. Like he didn't see me doing any jail time in this case. And
Wow.
I just remember him looking me right in the eye and saying that. But that changed.
How did that even come out? Was he just talking to you after the proceeding?
Yeah, he was just sitting with me and my attorney, like before and after the proceeding, and yeah, he was just
Wow.
he offered that as and we thought, okay, we're
so,
doing good.
So you get indicted after the jurors coming after you. Were any of the jurors sympathetic?
Not that I remember. They were all so angry.
So, and what did you say to your attorney afterwards? And what did your attorney say to you? I mean, were you pissed?
He said, I mean, wasn't happy with how it went, but my attorney was just saying, well, the DA said you're not seeing any jail for it. So, and the DA, when he was sitting with us, was like, I'm sorry that I'm prosecuting you for this.
Wow.
He was basically saying that his hands were tied because the victim in this case, Wegmans, wanted the prosecution.
Yeah.
So,
do you believe him? Do you think he actually felt that way? Or do you think that was all just a ruse?
I have no idea because, like even a couple years ago, he said that the judge in my case, that he never disagreed with any sentence that the judge had ever put out, which in my case, it was an illegal sentence. So he didn't disagree with that one either, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know what's in his mind. And he's Rick Healy. He was the DA at the time, and he's now a judge, like a supervising judge, who's in charge not only of his county, but my county as well.
Yeah. So Rick Healy was the prosecutor who was prosecuting you at that time?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And he was the DA of the entire county?
Yep.
And he was taking your case specifically?
He took my case, and he did not take the appeal. He stepped away and let his ADA handle the appeal.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, so you go through this grand jury proceeding. The indictment happens. Does it happen immediately, or there are other witnesses that are called before they indict?
We knew that I was indicted that day.
Okay.
So
wow. So that was very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, and how much longer does it take before you go to trial?
That was quite a few months. Yeah. It ended up being the following summer. Yeah. Yeah.
And tell us about the trial. Like what were the greatest hits or the greatest failures of the trial?
It was a 3-day trial. I was
a witness. Only 3 days for a felony
3
trial.
days. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's pretty short. Was jury selection just super fast?
Yeah, jury selection was pretty fast. So during jury selection, this one guy comes up. He needs to talk to the attorneys, the judge, where the other jurors couldn't hear, the other potential jurors. And he said he was like crying, and he's like, "I worked at this farm. It is hell on earth. There's no way I can serve on this jury, and that farm should be shut down."
Crazy.
Yeah.
Damn. Did you try and follow up with him?
No, we didn't. And that's the thing. We didn't pool any of the jurors. We didn't follow up with anybody because I would love to know. And yeah, this fella, I remember, his face, and it was amazing. And there were a couple people who said they couldn't serve on the jury because.
Was this in front of the entire jury pool, or was this in chambers? This is in chambers.
It was a sidebar kind of situation where the jury pool couldn't hear him. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. Okay, so you go through jury selection. Presumably, it's less than a day because if the trial's 3 days, jury selection can't be very long. You go to opening statements. What is like the opening statement like? Did you feel good about your attorneys? You have a different attorney at this point, right? When you go to trial.
I got Len Eggert and Amy Trikinski. Yeah, because by then the Shack 7 case had some struggles, so we knew that something was up with our attorney. And So they were great. I think Len gave the opening and closing statements, and basically Len he wanted to present a right to rescue defense at that time, and we were trying to rely on some case law out of, I think it was New York City, and there was like some some sort of like ASPCA action where they went into a pet store, and it was a necessity defense, like that they had gone into a pet store without permission to rescue animals, and the judge ruled that because it was not a pound or a place that where dogs and cats were, that they were chickens, that we could not use that defense at trial.
Interesting.
And so then they were,
Do you know if this is like the 597E equivalent in New York?
I think
what
so.
I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
There's a law that's very similar to 597E in New York. And I'm trying to remember what it's called.
Didn't they update that law in California for you?
Yeah, they amended it to prevent people from using it, or they tried to prevent people. But there's a law that basically says if an animal's been denied food and water, you're just entitled to go in to give them food and water. And New York's law is actually much clearer and better than California's law.
Yep, but the judge would not let us.
Wouldn't allow it. That's kind of nonsense, because I think from my reading of the law, it doesn't limit it to dogs and cats.
I know.
In California, it does say the word pound, and so it's confusing because it's not clear what a pound is. But in New York, I'm pretty sure it just says anywhere an animal's enclosed. So
yeah, I think the judge was not a friendly judge, by the way.
Yeah.
And but so basically, I think the defense really hinged on us going with the trespass. So we were kind of expecting me to be convicted of trespass and acquitted of the burglary and larceny.
You were expecting you to be convicted of the trespass, you think? So you didn't.
We were thinking, because our defense. I mean, we were thinking maybe there could be some sort of jury nullification going on and that's why we wanted to present footage of inside the facility to show some photographs. So we were able to present those at trial, but the jury did not. We did not put any. We did not try to counter the trespassing charges at all at trial.
Were there any key motions eliminate before the trial that you can recall?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
I think most of, but yeah, I think I've got all the transcripts.
Yeah, I actually would be pretty interested in the transcripts. You should send them to me at some point. But I'm looking at Agricultural Markets Law 356, and what it says is a person who, having impounded or confined, that's crucial, confined any animal, refuses or neglects to supply to such animal during its confinement a sufficient supply of good and wholesome air, food, shelter, and water, is guilty of a misdemeanor. And in case any animal shall be at any time impounded as aforesaid, it shall be lawful for any person from time to time, and as often as it shall be necessary, to enter into and upon any pound in which such animal shall be so confined, and supply it with necessary food and water.
Yeah.
That's the law. But the key thing is, in the liability prong of this law, it says the animal, any animal who's impounded or confined. It makes clear that the key issue is just whether the animal is confined, not the nature of the facility, whether it's a animal shelter or a factory farm or any place where an animal is confined. This law should apply. Did you end up appealing the applicability of 356 to farm animals?
I don't think that was part of our appeal. Our appeal was multi-pronged and very complicated, and I don't think we were even trying to fight the trespass conviction at that point. We were just trying to get the sentence. We did have a Fifth Amendment portion of our appeal that argued that I was given ineffective assistance of counsel when I was told to
speak to the grand jury.
Yeah, go in front of the grand jury, but that part of the appeal failed. The part of the appeal that was successful was the sentencing.
I'm surprised you even went with that argument, to be honest, because ineffective assistance arguments always fail. The only time they ever prevail is if the attorney who is ineffective themselves admitted it. If you can get a declaration from the attorney, did the attorney?
He fought it. He testified. He testified in front of the judge in my case. And what was called a Gomberg hearing. Yeah, he testified that he gave great assistance.
You must not be very happy with this gentleman.
Well, I mean, I think he was in over his head, I think, I don't know. Like, I think he thought he had a good read on the district attorney. Yeah. And he was wrong. And he was unhappy that we fired him.
Yeah. There's so many cases. I mean, if there's one lesson from this that I hope everyone takes to heart, it's that if you're unhappy with your attorneys, fire them. You should feel confident in your legal counsel, not just neutral, but confident. You should feel good about it. And I say this even when I'm representing someone. I'm saying, like, look, if you don't feel great about me, not just good, not just okay, but if you don't feel great about me, fire me. Find an attorney you trust. It's so important. I mean, your freedom is on the line. You don't want to like just go along with things because you don't want to rock the boat. I mean, rock the boat. Get a new attorney. And it's just, but lawyers have this way of like definitely pressuring clients sometimes to doing things they don't want to do because you just feel so powerless and lost. You don't know what to do. And you know, this person who's got a suit on and has Esquire at the end of their name and has a Juris Doctor degree tells you to do things, and you just feel like, I guess I have to do them because this fancy person is telling me. But it's such bad advice.
Well, it's hard too because we were, you know, this one attorney, my second attorney and my first attorney were both pro bono, and Eggert and Trakinski had a fee, and you know that got expensive real fast, especially with them coming out from New York City. So that was, you know, but that was worth it. It was worth it for me to go into that basically to pay for it. But that was they were so good. They were, you know, having attorneys who are familiar with animal, specifically, you know, animal law. It was life-changing. So
So tell me more about the trial. Like, what are the greatest hits from the trial itself? You testified, right?
Yeah, it was so much pressure to testify. I remember. Yeah. What an insane day. It was.
It is. It's weird.
It was a lot. You know, it was really interesting to see the farm manager testify, because he had the challenge of basically saying that we did go into the facility, that he was convinced we were there, even though Wegmans had denied it all along. So he had to thread that needle.
Didn't you just cross-examine the hell out of him and say, like, this guy lied repeatedly? So they did that.
Did.
The attorneys did that?
Yeah.
And the jury still found him credible enough to convict you.
Well, convict me of the trespass because I admitted to it. So, and that I went on the stand admitting to it. So the big thing that they got that the farm manager, they were grilling him on whether or not the birds had any value. And I think that's how we preveled on getting me
theft and burglary.
And
tell us more about.
Well, I was going to say, when I was acquitted of the burglary, I mean, I was worried about going to prison for 21 years.
A long time.
And a lot of people were like, you don't have to worry. The judge you're not going to even get jail time, including the DA's. You're not going to get a jail time, even if you're convicted of burglary. But when I was acquitted of that burglary charge and I no longer had 21 years in prison hanging over my head, I was thrilled in the courtroom. So even though I was convicted of trespass, I was like, this is amazing.
Until the judge sentences you to.
Until the judge in his sentencing statement a couple weeks later. And basically,
but actually, before you go to sentencing, just tell me more about testifying. Like, you said that was like one of the hardest things you've done, or it was just insane how much pressure there was. Say more about that.
I was just in a fugue state then. Like, I barely remember testifying. And I was just like,
what do you mean by a fugue state?
I wasn't. I was just going along with whatever being asked. I was like, yes, yep, yep. And I was answering questions incorrectly on the stand because of how much pressure was on me. But you know, even the direct examination of my attorney was high stakes and high pressure. And I mean, it was, you know, that was a lot. That was, you know, and I think coming out of my grand jury hearing where, you know, that was really rough.
You have these jurors going after you. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to do this again. Wow.
But, you know, the jury that we had at trial was so good. They were good people. I remember making eye contact. They
convicted you.
They convicted me, but I think they thought they were letting me off because it's just trespass. It's just a $75 ticket in their minds, like, or whatever. Like, I think that they didn't even realize
they didn't know that you're going to go to jail. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the messed up things about the jury system. In most courts, you're not actually allowed to talk about the sentence or the consequences of conviction. So, you know, I suspect that if my jury knew that I was going to go to jail in Sonoma County, they probably wouldn't have sentenced me. They would have been like, we're not going to convict this guy. But one of the jurors came to my sentencing and apologized to me. He wrote me a letter apologizing.
Wow. I remember.
So,
Well, I saw a juror out in the hallway after my the conviction, and she
mhm.
was like, she just I just remember she didn't really say much, but she was like, good job in there, like congratulations, and she just kind of moved along, and we didn't really connect. And I
Wow.
wish now
Wish
knowing
you
that
had
you can
some.
actually
Yeah.
poll these
Pull the
jurors
jury.
and
Yeah,
try
you
to,
can go and talk to them.
but at
Yeah, it's
that time,
crazy.
I thought it was inappropriate,
So
honestly.
wait, say more about your testimony. So you're there in a fugue stage, just saying yes, no.
Yeah,
Did you get
you're asking me to
cross-examined?
remember. Yes, I don't think he went very hard on me. I think
Really?
basically, I think he was like, "Were you in charge of this organization?" I think I said yes, even though we weren't really
Hmm.
organized in that kind of way. Um, but he was just trying to establish that I had like a leadership role and
Hmm.
should be the one who takes all the heat. And that's basically all I remember of that part of the trial. Like,
Hmm. So it
yeah,
wasn't as hard as a grand jury testimony, it sounds like.
no, it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of surprising how poor a lot of prosecutors are in cross-examination. Defense
Mm,
attorneys always make fun of prosecutors for being just terrible lawyers in general, but specifically the thing they're really bad about is cross-examination. It's because they're so often just presenting evidence rather than trying to break down other people's evidence because they're prosecutors and they don't understand how to properly impeach a witness. So, yeah, I will say, I mean, I don't think I've seen. I mean, I think the North Carolina prosecutors are probably the most effective in cross examination, but even they, I mean, partly because we just prepped our witnesses really well. I don't think they got anything in cross examination, and I think every time I've been cross examined, I felt like it helped our case. It's like, thank you for asking me these questions because now you give me an opportunity to say things that otherwise the judge wouldn't have allowed me to say. But it sounds like you had a similar experience where the cross examination didn't do much damage. Was there anything else big that happened during the trial that was either really exciting before sentencing or really disturbing?
I mean, I just thought it was great that the judge let us show large
The
blown
footage.
up photos
Wow.
of inside the facility and
Why did he
some
allow that
edited.
if he hated you so much?
I don't know. I think that the idea was it would help establish that we were inside the farm, and that would be
Hmm.
evidence that the prosecution could use against us. But yeah, we had like a 4-minute video edit that we presented, including, I
Really?
mean, it didn't, yeah, it wasn't
Damn.
it wasn't the worst footage. And I think the judge reviewed it. And I don't think there were any edits to it, though. It was just like four
Hmm.
minutes of inside the facility that we
Did the
played on
prosecution object to the playing that video?
no, no,
Wow.
because it
That's
helped
wild. The
establish.
prosecution didn't eject.
Yeah, I
You
don't
still
know.
had that 4-minute video?
I don't know. It's on VHS tape somewhere.
VHS. If you could find that video, I'd be fascinated to see it, to see what the judge allowed. Because we've
Yeah,
just been so limited in our cases. It's mind blowing how much they've cut out. You know,
I know.
like I know you know the story, but even just when we showed Lizzie, just a still photograph, they didn't let us show any video footage of Lizzie from in the farm. And then when we showed just a still photograph, the judge forced us to cut out like Lizzie from the background because the background had all these mother pigs in farrowing crates and like tattered the teats of the mother pig that are all ripped to shreds from constant nursing. And so we had to do this like stupid cardboard cutout thing where we cut out the shape of a piglet. And the jurors all received this little cutout. They're like, what is this? And they never got an explanation for why there's this like pig-shaped photograph they received. It was so weird. So just to think that you could just show a 4-minute video and that prosecution wouldn't even object, that's mind-blowing
Yeah,
to me.
we were surprised.
Yeah.
And then I don't even. There must have been like some police testimony, but there were very few witnesses.
Huh. Yeah, 3-day
And
trial. That's super fast.
yeah,
Okay. So the jury comes back. What is the closing argument? Is it like a right to rescue argument? What does Len say?
yeah. Len does kind of bring that up, like that this activist. He went. We're not arguing that he didn't go into the facility. You saw him say that, and but he did it for a good reason. You saw the conditions in there. They
Mm-hmm.
any birds that they rescue weren't worth anything to the company. The
Mm-hmm.
company was using the euphemism cervical dislocation,
Mm-hmm.
and Len had in his cross examination of the farm manager had said, "You mean wringing their neck, right?" And the
Mm-hmm.
prosecution had objected to that
Mm-hmm.
statement, but it was still in their heads of what happens to these animals,
Good words. Yeah.
and so yeah, so I think that was like the big, and I just remember how stressed Len was, like prepping for it, and like, being in the room with him when he's just like getting all ready to go. And I mean, that must be a really high stakes moment for an attorney.
Yeah, it
And
is.
yeah, so then the jury deliberated for, I'm not kidding, like 20 minutes maybe. Like it
Wow.
was so quick. We went
Yes.
to lunch and
Damn.
then we were called right back. And then then they read the sentence, and I thought it was a day to celebrate. But then 2 weeks later, the judge even mentioned my reaction when
Wow.
when he sentenced me. He said, when you were convicted, you didn't act like a convict. You acted like somebody celebrating. But
Wow.
I'm going to show you what kind of convict you are. And then at that time, we like a week before or something, like right around that time, Primetime Live, which was a show on ABC, they came out, and Chris Cuomo flew out to the egg farm. And Chris Cuomo and I were standing in front of the egg farm and talking about what went on in there. And then that episode ended up airing, I think, like 2 days before sentencing, or the weekend before sentencing. So I think that was fresh on the judge's mind as well.
Wow. Yeah.
Seeing
That you're
me
getting all this
before
media
trial.
attention. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not being apologetic in there. I'm just saying, this is terrible what's happening in this facility.
Yeah. That's crazy.
And
I didn't realize you were on Primetime Live. I knew you were in the New York Times. That must have been perceived after the sentencing, given that you're only convicted of trespass. You think it's going to be a $75 fine. You're in the New York Times. You get on Primetime Live. And that must have been seen as such like a big victory at the time.
Exactly. It was.
And
yeah,
then
it
the
was
sentencing
huge.
happens. So tell us what happened to the sentencing then.
Yeah. So then, so we go to sentencing, and my partner at the time, she was working for PETA, and she was out like campaigning somewhere. There was like such a low stakes day. We had dogs at home, but I had not. My
Didn't even
attorneys.
occur to you. Yeah.
No, we had no idea, especially since we were told there was going to be no jail time. And then, so yeah, I go to my sentencing, and the judge says, even though you were acquitted of the burglary, it was obvious that you went into the facility. You admitted it that you took hens out, and that is burglary in New York State. And so I am going to sentence you
for burglary,
as if you had committed burglary. And he
Wow.
gave me a sentence beyond the statutory limits for trespass in New York State. He gave me 6 months in jail, probation, which I guess you're not allowed to give both for a misdemeanor. I don't know. And then a fine and community service time. So basically everything he could throw at me, he did. And then the first thing Len said to me is, that's an illegal sentence. Like that, you're not going to have to serve all that time. Like that's an illegal sentence. And then I remember I was kind of in shock. And there was a guy from the public defender's office in court, an attorney, who brought me aside. He saw how stressed out I was or something. And he gave me a bunch of incredible advice on how to get by in jail, which was, he had no skin in the game, but, and I don't know his name, but that was a wonderful moment that he sat me down. He said, don't owe anybody any favors in there. If you have any kind of medical conditions, have them check it, report that, go to the nurse, your teeth, like all these different things that I wouldn't even think of that, he gave me advice on.
Wow.
And then I remember the ride to the jail.
Did the prosecution request a sentence?
The prosecution said that they would not oppose jail time, but they did not request jail time.
Wow. That's still a messed up move for them to say they wouldn't oppose it. They should have just said,
I know.
Yeah.
And then it was the jail time. The sentence aligned perfectly with what the Wegmans wanted. Like I want to call him, he's not the founder of Wegmans, but Robert Wegman was the main like CEO of Wegmans at the time. And he was at the end of his life, and he wrote a letter to the judge requesting this specific sentence. And that's what the judge gave me.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I remember riding to the jail in the back of
And this happens right after sentencing. Did you get remanded immediately?
I got remanded immediately. The
Well,
judge did request vegan meals at the jail, but the jail didn't
didn't have them.
didn't have them for me. And I just remember the inmates all were like, "You're a political prisoner, man." The ones
Yeah.
who had seen me be sentenced, they
Hmm.
said that's messed up what the judge did. So
Wow.
that was interesting. And then, yeah, my time in jail, I was in there for 35 days until we could get a resentencing hearing from that same judge, because
Hmm.
the appellate court would not review an illegal sentence, or would not like suspend my sentence, because
Hmm.
it was outside of the statutory limit. So they didn't even want to touch it until I got resentenced.
Yeah.
So it was
Wow.
35 days waiting for resentencing.
Yeah, I'm looking at New York law. It looks like the maximum sentence for trespass is 90 days for third-degree class trespass. Does that sound right to you?
90 days. I got I was convicted of 3 counts of trespass.
Okay.
So the judge gave me consecutive 90-day sentences, 2 of those. And then for the third count, he gave me probation. But that combination is not allowed in New York
Illegal.
state law.
So was the issue that he gave you probation in the sentence, or the issue? Because I mean, consecutive sentences that happens not infrequently.
Right. Yeah. It was the problem. I think it was the 2 parts. It was the probation and the sentence and the jail time together. And it
And him
was
saying
him
that he was going to do it for
stating
burglary. Yeah, on the record.
him, which
Yeah.
was a huge favor to us that he said
I
that
know that
openly
he said
on the
no, I
record.
know. Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. So how just paint the scene in the courtroom when the sentence is issued? Is it just you, or your supporters there too?
I might have had a couple supporters. I think maybe my sister and father were there.
Okay.
Um,
How are
and
people
a couple
reacting?
friends. They were shocked. I mean, yeah, and they
Yeah.
were, but a lot of them sprung into action to help me. And
Yeah. Wow.
they went and they let our dogs out,
Yep.
and they brought some books to the jail, and they immediately were all working. Which the jail is like an hour drive away from Rochester,
Yeah. So it's a long distance.
people were going back and forth, and then they were. I was just kind of off on my own, though. It was really bizarre. When you first go to jail in New York, I don't know if you had this experience, but you're kept in isolation while you have a tuberculosis test. So
They strip search you?
Yep.
Yeah, they strip search
Yep.
you. Do they make you bend over?
Yep. Cough.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Bend over and cough. Yeah. This is so they can look up your butthole, just so for
Yep.
folks who don't know.
Yeah, and they would.
It's a pretty humiliating experience all around.
They would do that group strip search after visitation, because they were, we were allowed like one brief kiss during visitation, and so they would strip search.
So you could actually be in the same room.
Yeah. But I ended up preferring to be separated by glass, so I did not need the strip search after, and you got a lot more privacy. Actually, you had your own private room with the glass.
But they let you have one kiss.
Yeah, like there was one, maybe it was a kiss in the start and a kiss at the end of the visit, which was cool. Or a hug would be fine too. But then you get a strip search for that.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's one of the things I missed most when I was in jail, just the opportunity to hug another human being or an animal, like I didn't see my dogs. What did your lawyer say when the judge issued this illegal sentence? Did they say this immediately? Did they object and say, like, Your Honor, this is not okay?
I don't know if I think they might have tried to say something to the judge, but they were immediately shut down. And they said, Len said to me, we're going to fight this. We're going to appeal right away. And then they actually teamed up with my initial attorney, not the
one you fired.
Not the one we fired, but that initial attorney. They teamed up with him to file some motions, and he was kind of like their liaison to the court, to the appellate court, and he was super helpful in that, at that time, and it was a very long 35 days. Like,
sure, yeah. How did the prosecutor respond to the sentence? Did they seem surprised, or?
I remember looking at his face, and he just had a neutral look, and he kind
He
of
didn't
looked
care.
disinterested. I don't
Yeah.
even know what was going through his head. I should reach out to him, but I don't know if I
Yeah.
want to.
You should call this guy out. Never had a bad sentence.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And
So
then,
tell us about jail
well,
and resentencing before we close, and then I'll try and wrap it up and just ask you to share.
yeah, I know. We're going long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, jail
We
was.
had Julie disrupting us so many times. Hopefully, Shlo can edit that out.
Yep. So jail was, the inmates were great. I got
Really?
along with them really well. It was sad to see so many of their lives falling apart on the
Yeah,
inside.
it is sad.
Yeah. And then, losing their
Because you lose your
homes, their
jobs,
jobs,
you lose your homes, you go into
their
debt.
partners.
There's so many collateral consequences from being incarcerated. Was this minimum
Yep.
security? Was it mostly like lower level offenders, or did you have like murderers?
I was put into minimum security, but I was given a job as a trustee, where I was serving eggs to the jail population.
That's messed up.
So yeah, it was wild, but at least I got to prepare my own food.
Yeah.
Um,
Did they do
and
that intentionally just to mess with you, force you to serve eggs to the inmates?
I couldn't decide if that was it or if they were concerned about me not having any food to eat
Food.
because they
Interesting.
didn't have a special diet.
So that
So we were
hated you
given,
or loved you? It's not
yeah,
very
who
much.
knows?
Wow.
So I ate mostly lima beans, drank orange juice.
Oh, you had orange juice?
Yeah.
Wow. I guess I had soy milk. You probably didn't have soy milk.
No,
That was my drink of
no.
choice. I was so happy when I got soy milk. I was like, yes, soy milk.
Yeah, and the margarine was vegan, so I was
Wow.
able to put the margarine on the lima beans. So I remember
So
that.
you just ate
diet
margarine
well.
and lima beans? You didn't have bread or peanut butter?
No peanut butter. We did occasionally have bread. Yeah.
Wow.
But it was all very strictly controlled by the jail dietitian,
Yeah,
like
I
what
know.
we had. And then I also had these weird jobs. When I found out I was being released by the appellate court, I got a stay of execution is what it's called. I was breaking apart gravel with a pickaxe.
Wow.
So they had all these weird jobs for me. The guards were terrible. The guards
Really?
were abusive. They tried to goad me into fighting, or I don't know
Really?
what. They
Wow.
called me awful names. So, but the
Yeah, they're
inmates
calling
were
you like
great.
what, chicken boy or something like that?
Chicken effer. But yeah,
No,
I don't
chicken
want
effort. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's messed up. That's like emotional abuse.
yeah. It was wild. And they were saying they sometimes they had graphic depictions, like verbally they would say
Wow.
what I was doing to the
Right.
chickens. Yeah, it's really bizarre. And sometimes the inmates would kind of laugh at that, which that's probably what hurt the most. But they were still the inmates were still cool. I think they were just trying to go along with.
Well, you got the authority figure who controls everything in your life telling a joke. If you don't laugh, I mean, you're next and they're targets. Yeah, the way I've described to people is jail is a place where every interaction we have with the authorities is focused entirely on making you feel like shit. That is their goal. It feels like every interaction, just you are a worthless human being. I'm going to make you feel worthless. I mean, even just like the random clerks who would interact with me, I'd be like, why are you being such an asshole? Like in normal human interaction, if you talked about this, if you talk to people in this way, it'd just be like, this is totally inappropriate. You can't just demean people in every interaction. And there are some guards who are better than others. And there were some guards who are actually almost kind of cool. But I don't know. I mean, just the example I always give is just, I told you the story of like when there's flooding in our jail cell and there's feces coming out from the toilets and from the drains. And, our unit wasn't as bad. But there was another unit that was, it was flooding. Human waste was getting up to like their knees, and the guards wouldn't let them out and just said, no, you're just gonna have to sit there in your own waste, and in many ways it felt very apt for me because it just showed me, wow, this is almost like the same environment as a factory farm. Obviously factory farms are so much worse, but the fact that animals have to live in their own feces, right? Just, it's true of a factory farm and it's true in jail cells too. They're evil places. Yeah. You must have felt so good when you found out that you were going to get a stay of execution of the sentence, huh?
Yeah. Then the other inmates all got really mad, which I was surprised, but they were not happy I was getting out. They were like, what?
Really?
what about us? Like, that's not
Yeah.
cool, and they
Oh,
were
that's
they were
sad.
upset. Yeah.
Yeah, when I got, all
And
the inmates were happy when I got my
oh,
sentence.
that's good.
Well, I mean, when I got my sentence, I knew I was going to have to stay another couple weeks after my sentencing, but all the inmates were really happy. They're like, because I could have gotten 6 years and I got 90 days, and they were like, "All right,
Hmm.
this is great," you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I could see.
then we get out. Yeah, I remember going to a local burger joint immediately
Wow.
after and getting a veggie burger. Yep. And then it was great being free again. And luckily I never had to go back.
Yeah. So you get this stay of execution. How is this delivered to you? Does one of the COs, the corrections officers, bring this to you in like a letter or something, or does your attorney tell you this? Are you able to meet with them?
I think they radioed out to the CO who was
Hmm.
watching me break the gravel with a pickaxe at the
Hmm.
local. It was a county-run nursing home, and they needed to move this gravel out. It had like settled or something, so I was
Oh, they
loosening it
took you
up.
out of the
And
jail to work.
yeah, they were taking us to like local county facilities. There was asbestos abatement going on there, and we did not have any protection.
Wow, that's fucked up.
There's a lot of weird stuff going on. But I remember they radioed out to him and saying, "Hey, Durand's being let out." And so I'm like,
Hmm.
"What?" And so they brought me
Wow, so
back
so
to.
surprised to you.
It was a total shock. They brought me to where I was. I was in the low security portion of the jail called the annex. So they brought me there, and I was able to call my attorney, collect from
Hmm.
there. And Len explained to me that I was being let out by the appellate court, and then they had me, pack my stuff up, and then I was escorted out by one of the COs.
So why did the Court of Appeals give you a stay of execution if they were waiting for the resentencing hearing?
Well, the resentencing hearing had just happened, and then we
Okay.
weren't sure what. Yeah, so the judge basically resentenced me. My original judge had resentenced me to just the 6 months in jail, no more
Mhm.
probation. I don't know about the fine, and no more community service.
Mhm.
Um, and so that had happened a couple of days before, but we weren't sure if the appellate court would give me a stay of execution after the resentencing. They might have just been satisfied. Okay, it's a legal sentence now,
Sentence now, yeah.
so yeah, so now you can just go serve
Okay.
your time. But nope, they decided to give me a stay of execution. I was informed by Len and Amy that the chances of winning on appeal are very low.
Low, yeah, I know.
But we were going to give it a shot.
So what
Um,
happened then? So what happened with the appeal?
then there was a 3-year process of various filings, and then the New
And
York
all this time,
appeal
you've got
process.
the stay of execution, so if you lose, you're going back to
Mhm.
jail.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep. Luckily, I didn't lose my job,
Mhm.
and so I was basically I needed to make tons of copies of what happened at trial, like the whole transcript, bind
Mhm.
them in books and mail them around the state, just part of New York appeals process. And then we had an additional hearing called a Gomberg hearing. I don't
Mhm.
remember what took 3 years, though. I just remember that one hearing. There were probably other hearings,
Yeah.
but that hearing was to establish some of the things the appellate court wanted to know, things that did not come out at trial. They
Yeah.
wanted that, they wanted that testimony. They wanted the judge, the original judge in my case, to have more findings or something,
Mhm.
just in order to get more information for them, especially about the ineffective
Ineffective
assistance of
assistance.
counsel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, I
So the
remember
Gomberg hearing was
refresh.
happened at the trial court. It wasn't the appellate court.
Yep. Yep. It was at the trial court. The only time I went to the appellate court was to drop off paperwork.
Paper. Okay.
I
What happened at the
never had
Gomberg
any.
hearing? So your attorney obviously defended himself, and then
Yeah.
was there a finding?
I don't think there was a finding at the hearing, but there was just testimony that went back to
Okay.
the appellate
The
court.
appellate court.
Mhm. And then I remember refreshing the website of the appellate court, and
Over and over again.
the website is so discouraging because it
Mhm.
has all of their rulings, and all of their rulings are denying the appeal.
Yeah.
Um, and but finally, on that day when the appeal was coming out, I hit refresh. There it was, right there. I clicked on it, and they had ruled in our favor on the
Wow.
sentence. But what they did
Basically, on the
was they
grounds that he unlawfully sentenced you to a penalty for burglary.
Mhm. Yep.
Wow.
So but then their remedy was for me to get resentenced by the
Oh
same
my
judge.
God. Yeah.
So we went back.
That's
I
so
went back
messed
in front of
up.
that judge. I know, it's wild. And I don't have a transcript of the resentencing hearing, but I had my Unitarian Universalist minister write a letter to the judge. I had my grandparents write a letter to the judge. That was
Mm-hmm.
it. And the letters just said, he's not going to get in any trouble anymore. He's a good
Mm-hmm.
guy. And so I was so nervous going in front of the judge, but the judge had a total change of heart or something. I don't know
Wow.
what it was, but he said, I could tell that your heart is in the right place. I could
Mm-hmm.
tell that, you want what's best for these animals, and that you did it for a good cause. And so I'm giving you time served. And
Wow.
that was that.
I mean, he probably just felt honestly chagrined by the fact that he had his judgment reversed. I don't know if you might be
I
giving
don't
him
know.
too much credit, because it's embarrassing. It's very rare to have a judgment vacated by the appellate court. I mean, it's probably less than 5% of appeals.
Mm-hmm.
And so he probably had a lot of vegan egg on his face and just felt like, all right, if I go too hard on this guy, it's going to make it look even worse that I just got reversed. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too cynical. Maybe he did genuinely have a change of heart. It must have felt so good, though, when you found out you weren't
It
going to have to
felt
go back
great.
to jail. Yeah.
Yep. And then every summer, my family rents a cottage somewhere. Or not every
Mhm.
summer, but almost every summer. And so we rented a cottage in the Finger Lakes. And so we go there to relax. And all of a sudden, I notice the photo of my judge up on the wall. And
Wow.
then I look around, and there's photos of him on every wall. And it was
Wow.
his summer home that we had rented.
Oh my God. That's so
Or his family.
creepy.
I know. His
That
family
is
summer home.
so creepy.
There were articles about him becoming an attorney and like everything.
What's the judge's name?
Dennis Kehoe. And he's retired
Dennis.
now. But
Wow.
yeah, we stayed at his family summer home.
It's Kehoe.
Hoe. Mm-hmm.
Hoe.
Yeah.
Kehoe. Is he Tulane? No.
No, Dennis Kehoe. And he was Wayne County.
That's crazy. Huh.
So
Judge Kehoe stepping down.
what a wild end to that story.
Wow. Okay. I'm just looking at a picture of this guy. What a mustache.
I know. And he had like
This article
gray
says
sideburns.
one of the most respected jurists, not only in Wayne County, but in the entire Finger Lakes region.
Yeah.
That's wild. After making such kind of an unprofessional and just honestly Bush League mistake in your case. That's wild. What happened with the ineffective assistance appeal? Did that prevail at all?
Yeah, so that failed. They basically pointed to the fact that I had actually signed paperwork waiving my Fifth Amendment rights. And that was under advice of this attorney. And I remember I was like feeling the heebie-jeebies when I got there to grand jury hearing. But the wheels had already been turning. I was worried if I didn't go in there that I would that they would hold that against me. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So I've said, okay, fine, I'll sign it and go in and testify.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, ineffective assistance counts are really hard, which is incredibly disturbing because, I mean, if I had to guess, I would guess 10% of criminal defendants are actually getting effective assistance of counsel.
I know.
Because you were in a privileged class relative to most defendants in the criminal justice system. You probably had better resources available to you, and you got ineffective assistance and no accountability. But the legal profession is just this huge cartel that protects itself. I have so little respect for the way our criminal justice system and our legal system generally operates. It's really embarrassing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this resentencing happens, time served. Then what?
And then, I mean, then I get to live my life. I mean, but the event did definitely, I was lucky enough to keep my job and my home. But, I definitely had family struggles, like conflicts that had arisen from my incarceration, which I had seen in other inmates as well.
And you went to debt to pay your legal fees, right?
Yeah. Yep. So I basically lived off of credit cards so that I could pay my attorneys cash. So I had amassed quite a bit of credit card debt, but I just paid that down over the years. And I do feel like if I had a local attorney who a local animal rights attorney, which would be a dream, then I would be more free to do that kind of action again. But I do feel like that was my biggest stumbling block, is needing to bring in somebody from out of town. And then, I think, I'm so grateful for everything I learned, though. I wouldn't take it back for a second. It was a wild ride, but, it's definitely worth it. And it changed my life for the better. It definitely, I already knew that about racial disparities in the criminal justice system and how terrible the system is in general. But that was a massive wake up call that I saw it with my own eyes.
Yeah.
In a county, in a rural county, I was in with all people of color, and it was so horrifying. So, that was a big moment for me, and it definitely changed my outlook. Maybe
it's crazy. Sonoma County is also, pretty much every jail cell I've been in, it's primarily people of color, even in counties that are like 90% white. It's like, you just take all the people of color in this entire county and just put them in jail? Because it kind of feels that way. I don't see any people of color outside of jail. They're all in here. And it's weird. A lot of times they're just being punished for being poor, for having some sort of disability. It's a pretty vile system.
I saw plenty of that. People who are obviously had disabilities, who were like the lookout for a burglary or something, and they didn't even know what they were getting into, that kind of thing.
And suddenly end up in prison or jail for 10 years. Wow. All right. So what's the most important lesson you learned from all this?
Well, I think the thing that I love hanging out with farm animals now, taking care of them. I love volunteering with farm animals. So I'm just grateful at how that whole process helped me connect with these chickens, and then how that has led me to, open up my mind, even after, going vegan for I wasn't really thinking of the farm animals at the time. And that made me connect with them, to see them as individuals. And, why do
you think that is? Why did that experience allow you to connect with them?
It's just, I was, just seeing what they go through, and then maybe seeing how I was treated and incarcerated, and how what I was going through was nothing compared to what they go through. But just seeing how this whole system is rigged against them and anybody who's trying to stand up for them. It really, it makes me have a lot more respect for farm animals. And I don't know. I wish we thought that the whole world was going to go vegan through the open rescue movement. People just needed to see. I think that awareness of factory farming is much higher now than it was back then. I think pretty 100%. Much everybody knows what it is. They know it's wrong. They oppose it, but unfortunately, it is still the prevailing food system in America.
Well, you thought that open rescue would make everyone vegan, and you're still right. It is going to. It's just going to take a little more time than maybe you expected.
Yeah.
I was naive back then too. I just thought I could show people meat your meat, and that would change the entire world. But things are often a little more complicated than they had first seem. Yeah. But in the long term, the arc of the universe is still bending towards justice. So, my lesson from your case is, mad respect to you for saving those animals and for inspiring a lot of people, including me. Because I think one of the reasons I started doing open rescues was because of your case, and just seeing how much the legal system was being destroyed, and the importance of lawyers themselves, taking charge of this movement and trying to lead it. So, because you were definitely mistreated by the legal system. It was embarrassing. So I'm glad you're still standing and still fighting and helping us out too. All right. We've been going a long time, my friend. This is a great, great conversation. I really appreciate you spending some time with us. And
thanks for having me.
Of course. And let's go rescue some more animals and make that vegan world a reality for them.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, my friend. We don't have to hurt animals. We can protect them. We don't have to kill them. We can care for them. And that's who we're meant to be, right? That's who we are when we're at our best. We're caring for each other and for the other living beings of this earth and not hurting them.